Hey there, tonight we're exploring the frosty decks and turbulent tales of Christmas at sea, where visions of sugar plums were replaced by relentless waves and the harsh reality that Santa rarely made it past the squalls. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the great age of sail, where adventure and danger were as common as the sea breeze, Christmas at sea was a peculiar affair. Forget the cozy firesides and family gatherings. Imagine instead a world where your festive cheer is measured by how little your hardtack resembles concrete and whether the ship's cat has been commandeered for dinner. Sailing was the original subscription box of surprises. Nearly everything was unexpected, including how you'd celebrate the holidays. Let's start with the ships themselves, the hulking wooden beasts that dared to defy the ocean. You had your frigates, galleons, and the ever-popular merchant vessels. The galleons were the SUVs of the sea, big, bulky, and filled with everything from spices to silk. Meanwhile, frigates were the sports cars, fast and agile, often armed to the teeth. These ships, though majestic, were no five-star hotels. The average length of a ship during the 18th century was around 100 feet, but the sailor's space for sleeping and eating was about the size of a modern studio apartment, without the luxury of indoor plumbing or Netflix. As for the sailors, they were a motley crew, literally and figuratively. These were people who thought a steady diet of salt pork and biscuits was just dandy. But let's not romanticize their lives too much. The age of sail wasn't just about sunsets and sea shanties. It was about enduring the kind of living conditions that would make a modern-day prison cell look like a penthouse suite. And when it came to Christmas, well, you made do with what you had, or didn't have, which was often the case. Celebrating Christmas at sea involved a curious blend of tradition and improvisation. If you were lucky, the captain might allow a special ration of grog, the sailor's nectar of the gods, which is basically watered-down rum. If you were unlucky, well, you could always look forward to the charming company of scurvy. That's right. Good old vitamin C deficiency was the unwelcome guest at every sailor's Christmas dinner. The Royal Navy, ever the bastion of foresight and wisdom, didn't officially adopt lemon juice to combat scurvy until 1795. Until then, sailors had a life expectancy that would make a fruit fly envious. Let's not forget the weather. Winter storms at sea were as pleasant as a slap in the face with a wet fish. These storms could turn a ship into a marsh pit of chaos. Waves taller than a four-story building could engulf the deck, and the wind would scream like a banshee on a bad day. But for those hardy souls, a Christmas storm was just another opportunity to show how tough they really were, or how much they liked tempting fate. And then there were the personalities. Take Captain James Cook, for instance, a man who could plot a course through uncharted waters, but probably couldn't find his way around a kitchen. Cook, on one of his many voyages, celebrated Christmas in 1776 off the coast of New Zealand. His crew enjoyed a feast that included goose pie, which is the best we have, according to the ship's log. That goose was likely a local bird that had never seen a goose in its life. But hey, it's the thought that counts, right? The sailors themselves, often pressed into service or taken from debtors' prisons, were not exactly living their best lives. They were paid in pittances, if they were paid at all, and spent months at sea without seeing land. Their families left behind were often as much at the mercy of fate as the men at sea. Yet, amidst this hardship, the sailors found a sense of camaraderie, a bond forged in the face of adversity and shared misery. So, as you tuck yourself into bed with visions of sugar plums, or whatever it is that helps you sleep, spare a thought for those long-ago sailors. They didn't have the luxury of a quiet night's rest. Instead, they had the creaking of the ship, the smell of salt and sweat, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, the storm would pass without sending them to a watery grave. Christmas at sea was less about peace on earth and more about survival on water, a testament to human resilience and the never-ending quest for adventure, or at least a paycheck. In the end, Christmas at sea was a mixed bag of hardship and high spirits, where the ocean's vast emptiness was both a prison and a playground. It was a holiday that tested the limits of human endurance and the depths of human creativity. And while the world today may be vastly different, the spirit of those sailors lives on in every daring adventure and every stubborn refusal to let the waves win. But why did these daring sailors brave the winter seas, risking life and limb when they could have been snug on land, possibly eating something that didn't resemble shoe leather? Well, my friend, it all comes down to a heady cocktail of greed, glory, and a dash of geopolitical chess that would make even the savviest Wall Street broker break a sweat. First off, let's talk trade routes, the original Silk Roads of the sea, if you will. These were no ordinary paths. They were the veins through which the lifeblood of empires flowed. Spices from the East Indies, silks from China, and gold from the Americas weren't just luxury items. They were the currency of power. The demand for these goods was insatiable, and whoever controlled their flow controlled the purse strings of the known world. Europe in the 18th century was like a massive, competitive Black Friday sale, with nations elbowing each other for supremacy in the global marketplace. The stakes were high, and time was quite literally money. If a ship could make it to port before the competition, the owner would reap rewards so golden they'd make a dragon jealous. Let's put some numbers on that. A single voyage could bring in profits of 400% or more, assuming the ship and its goods survived the journey. Yes, 400%, not a typo. The only downside, the minor detail that the ocean could swallow you whole. Now, about those empires. Picture the British and the Dutch, locked in an epic struggle for maritime dominance, each trying to outdo the other in a game that had no rulebook but plenty of risks. The British East India Company and the Dutch VOC, Verenigd Oostindische Compagnie, were the Amazon and Alibaba of their day, only with more cannons and fewer online reviews. They didn't just want a slice of the pie, they wanted the whole bakery. And why not? Whoever controlled the sea lanes controlled the wealth. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just about a desire for wealth. No, it was about survival. Economies back home were ravenous beasts, and these voyages were their feeding time. The financial incentives were enormous, but so were the costs. Ships were expensive to build, and even more expensive to maintain. A fully rigged ship in the 18th century could cost upwards of £10,000, about what you'd need to buy a small island today. And let's not forget the crew, those poor souls caught in the cogs of commerce. Speaking of which, the human cost of these journeys was staggering. Sailors were often promised wages that would make a modern minimum wage look like a king's ransom, but getting paid was a different story. Many sailors returned home only to find they were owed back pay if they made it back at all. Life at sea was a gamble, and the house usually won. Yet, despite the danger, men signed up in droves, driven by desperation or the lure of adventure, or because they were volunteered by the local press gang. The environmental challenges were no less daunting. The winter seas were the stuff of nightmares. Imagine navigating through a labyrinth of icebergs, the wind howling like a banshee, all while trying to keep your ship from becoming a very large, very expensive ice cube. The North Atlantic, especially, was notorious for its ferocity. Storms could arise out of nowhere, turning the sea into a cauldron of chaos. Ships that left port with bright hopes and full holds often returned as ghostly wrecks, or not at all. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, Christmas voyages continued. They were a testament to human audacity, a daring dance with the sea that bordered on madness. Yet, it was this very madness that fueled the age of exploration, that drove empires to expand, and that, ironically, set the stage for the modern world. The tales of these voyages, filled with both triumph and tragedy, remind us that the line between boldness and folly is as thin as a sailor's hammock. So, as we continue our journey into the heart of maritime history, remember that these daring souls were not just players in a game of economic chess. They were pioneers in a world where the sea was both an adversary and an ally, where fortunes could be won or lost with the turn of the tide. And while the stories of their exploits might be sprinkled with a touch of romance, the reality was far grittier, a testament to the indomitable human spirit, and perhaps a touch of insanity. As we sail further into this tale of courage and commerce, keep your sea legs steady. The waves are only getting higher. And speaking of ghostly wrecks, it's time to dive into the murky waters of maritime legends, those tantalizing tales spun tighter than a sailor's knot. Picture the ghost ship of Christmas Eve, a spectral story more common than a sailor's salty language. It's said that on a foggy Christmas night, a phantom vessel appears, its sails billowing with an unearthly glow, crewed by souls lost to the sea. Now, before you start conjuring images of pirates and treasure maps, let's cut through the mist with some cold, hard facts. These legends were not birthed solely from the depths of imagination, but were often the flotsam of reality, tossed about by the currents of human experience and embellished more than a sailor's yarn. The ghost ship of Christmas Eve, for instance, likely owes its origins to the Flying Dutchman, a 17th century legend about a cursed ship doomed to sail the oceans forever. The Dutchman was the rock star of maritime myths, making appearances in everything from operas to Pirates of the Caribbean. But here's the kicker. The legend might have been inspired by a real shipwreck during a ferocious storm around the Cape of Good Hope. People tend to weave fantasies when faced with nature's merciless wrath and the very real threat of becoming fish food. Now, why do these ghostly narratives captivate us? Simple. They're the maritime equivalent of a good horror movie, thrilling, spine-tingling, and just believable enough to keep you on edge. But unlike your average slasher flick, these stories were shaped by the media of the time, particularly newspapers, which operated on the timeless tenet that bad news sells. And when the news was a little too bland, well, a ghost story or two never hurt circulation. In the 19th century, reports of ghost ships were about as common as sea monsters, and just as likely to be exaggerated. Let's anchor this discussion with some figures. The 1,800 saw a staggering number of shipwrecks, about 50,000 to be precise. That's roughly one shipwreck for every day of the century. The British Isles alone accounted for 1/3 of these maritime disasters. A combination of poor navigation, treacherous weather, and the occasional bout of human error meant that ships were sinking faster than you could say, man overboard. These wrecks were not merely fodder for ghost stories. They were economic disasters, each ship a floating investment equivalent to several $1 million in today's terms, often uninsured and uninsuredly lost to the briny deep. Families left behind were often plunged into poverty, their futures as bleak as a sailor's diet. So, while the romantic notion of a ghost ship might send shivers down our spines, the reality was far colder and crueler. Yet, amidst the wreckage of fact and fiction, some tales stood the test of time, buoyed by the human love for drama. Take the story of the HMS Eurydice, a British training ship that capsized off the Isle of Wight in 1878. Over 300 men were lost, and the ship was said to reappear as a ghostly apparition in later years. Witnesses claimed to see the phantom vessel, its sails set as if to catch an otherworldly breeze. Was it a trick of the light, or just a local pub's favorite tale to tell over a pint? Perhaps both. These maritime myths endure because they tap into our fascination with the unknown and the uncanny. They remind us that the sea, with its unfathomable depth, is a realm where reality and imagination flow together like mingling tides. But let's not forget the human cost hidden beneath these stories. For every ghost ship sighting, there were real lives lost, real families shattered, stories that didn't make the headlines but were etched into the hearts of those left behind. As we navigate this ocean of myth and reality, it's crucial to keep our bearings. While the tales of ghostly vessels might offer a shiver of excitement, the true stories behind them reveal a world where the stakes were as high as the waves. The sailors of yore, with their resilience and resourcefulness, faced these challenges head-on, armed with little more than courage and a touch of madness. So next time you hear a ghost story from the sea, remember the grain of truth that lies at its heart, and spare a thought for those who lived and died by the whims of the ocean. Now, let's not let all these spooky tales overshadow the stone-cold reality of shipwrecks during the Christmas season. The harsh truth is, shipwrecks were no mere figments of imagination. They were devastating events, as real as the rust on an anchor. Consider the case of the SS Georgette, which met its watery fate off the coast of Western Australia on December 1, 1876. The ship, laden with timber and passengers, struck a reef during a storm. Of the 50 souls aboard, 12 perished, marking a grim start to the festive season. Even more tragic was the fate of the SS Norge, a Danish passenger liner that sank on June 28, 1904. While not a Christmas tragedy, it's a stark reminder of the perils of sea travel. Over 600 emigrants were lost, many heading to a new life in America, only to find their dreams dashed on the rocks of Rockall, an isolated sea stack in the North Atlantic. The SS Norge disaster was one of the worst civilian maritime calamities of the century, a testament to the dangers lurking beneath the waves. But why did these wrecks capture the public's imagination, turning into legends that outlasted the memories of the actual events? It's the allure of the unknown, the thrill of the macabre, and the human tendency to find meaning in chaos. Shipwrecks were the perfect canvas for storytelling, each one a blank slate ready to be filled with the brushstrokes of human imagination. Newspapers played a pivotal role in shaping these narratives, often embellishing details to sell more copies. After all, a ghost ship is far more intriguing than a mere maritime mishap. Media of the day was the Instagram of its time, crafting stories that went viral, on paper at least. And just like today, a touch of scandal, a hint of mystery, and a dash of the supernatural were often all it took to capture the public's attention. The result? A rich tapestry of legends that has woven its way into the fabric of maritime history, stories that continue to intrigue and inspire, long after the original ships have sunk into oblivion. As we continue to chart a course through this sea of history, it's important to remember that behind every myth lies a kernel of truth. The legends of ghost ships and maritime mysteries are more than just tales of the supernatural. They are reflections of the times in which they were born, echoes of an era when the sea was a vast, untamed frontier. They remind us of the indomitable spirit of those who dared to venture into the unknown, the pioneers of their time who faced the ocean's fury with nothing more than a stout heart and a sturdy ship. So, the next time you hear a story of ghostly galleons or phantom frigates, remember the sailors who inspired these tales. They were real people, living real lives, in a world where the line between life and death was as thin as the mist that shrouds a ghost ship on a moonlit night. And as we sail further into the depths of their stories, let's keep our eyes on the horizon, ever mindful of the shadows that dance just beyond our sight. But let's shift our gaze from ghostly galleons to something a bit more tangible, tools and tech that kept sailors afloat and sane amidst the chaos of winter seas. In a world where the ocean was more unpredictable than a cat in a thunderstorm, navigational advancements were the unsung heroes of maritime history. Think of them as the GPS of their day, minus the soothing voice that tells you to recalculate. First up, the chronometer. Forget your flashy wristwatch. This was the Rolex of the 18th century, only it didn't just tell time. It helped prevent you from becoming a permanent resident of Davy Jones' Larker. Designed by the brilliant John Harrison in the 1730, this nifty device solved the age-old problem of calculating longitude at sea. Why was that a big deal? Well, before the chronometer, sailors might as well have been guessing their position by watching the seagulls. When it came to navigation, they were essentially playing Marco Polo with the ocean. Harrison's invention, awarded the princely sum of £20,000 by the British government, was like handing sailors the keys to the maritime kingdom. It was a game changer, and not just for the Brits. The chronometer's precision revolutionized sea travel, turning voyages from wild gambles into calculated risks. Then we have the sextant, the swashbuckler's answer to Google Maps. Introduced in the mid-18th century, this device allowed sailors to measure the angle between a celestial object and the horizon. It was the kind of tool that could make you feel like an astronomical genius, even if you couldn't tell your North Star from a north-facing compass. The sextant was crucial for determining latitude, helping sailors figure out if they were on the right path or just going in circles. When you're navigating the North Atlantic in the middle of winter, that's the kind of information you want to have. But not all innovations were winners. Consider the marine steam engine, a contraption that sounded promising on paper, but was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. Early steam engines often broke down at the worst possible moments, leaving ships stranded and sailors inventing new curse words. The SS Great Eastern, launched in 1858, was the Titanic of its time, massive and ambitious, but plagued by technical hiccups. It was supposed to be the future of maritime travel, yet it ended up being an oversized, money-guzzling albatross. If nothing else, it taught future engineers what not to do. Now, let's dive into the realm of sailor superstitions, where science met seafaring lore in a head-on collision. You see, navigating the high seas wasn't just about knowing your latitude and longitude. It was about keeping the sea gods happy. Sailors were a superstitious lot, and who could blame them? When you're at the mercy of the elements, a little luck never hurt. Some rituals were quaint, like whistling for a wind or tying knots in ropes to ensure a safe journey. Others were more bizarre, like the belief that having women on board was bad luck, unless, of course, they were painted on the prow as figureheads. Apparently, a wooden woman was more seaworthy than a real one. And then there were the infamous albatrosses. Killing one of these birds was said to bring down the wrath of the sea guards, a superstition immortalized in Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Sailors took this one seriously, treating albatrosses with more respect than some of their captains. It was a curious blend of reverence and fear, a reminder that even in an age of technological advancement, the ocean's mysteries often defied logic. In this world of swirling seas and sky-high stakes, sailors clung to their rituals like lifelines. They were a testament to the enduring human need for control, even in situations where control was an illusion. These superstitions were as much a part of the maritime culture as the ships themselves, a reflection of the precarious existence that defined life at sea. As we sail further into the annals of history, it's clear that the ocean was both a vast, untamed frontier and a crucible of innovation. Navigational tools carved a path through its mysteries, while superstitions provided a psychological anchor amidst the stormy seas. The blend of science and lore, fact and fantasy, shaped the maritime world in ways that continue to ripple through time. So, as we continue our voyage through the stories of those who dared to challenge the waves, it's important to remember the human ingenuity that turned the tide. These were the pioneers of their time, armed with tools that were as much about survival as they were about discovery. And while the legends of ghost ships and sea monsters might captivate our imaginations, it's the real tales of innovation and resilience that truly define the spirit of the sea. As we look to the horizon, let's not forget the sailors who charted the course, their legacies etched into the very fabric of maritime history. As we raise anchor on this final voyage through the annals of maritime history, let's set sail into the realm where romance meets reality, the depiction of Christmas at sea in literature and film. The stories that have been spun about sailors' Yuletide adventures. From the cozy glow of Hollywood's lens to the pages of classic novels, Christmas at sea has often been painted with a brush dipped in both nostalgia and dramatic license. But here's the thing. These portrayals are about as accurate as a sailor's promise to quit swearing. Let's start with literature. Herman Melville's Moby Dick didn't exactly feature a heartwarming Christmas dinner scene, unless you count the camaraderie of harpooning a whale as festive. In reality, the life of a sailor was more akin to Melville's bleak depiction of the whaling industry. Gritty, relentless, and about as predictable as a runaway barrel. Yet, the romantic notion of adventure on the high seas has always been a literary goldmine, even if the actual experience was more about dodging scurvy than dancing with sugar plums. In film, the sea has been a backdrop for countless tales of bravery and camaraderie, often glossing over the less glamorous aspects of maritime life. Take Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, a film that gives us Russell Crowe as a swashbuckling captain navigating both the seas and the complexities of human nature. While the film captures the spirit of naval adventure, it artfully sidesteps the more mundane realities, like the sailor's diet that would make a modern nutritionist weep. The allure of the sea is undeniable, but the reality was a bit less cinematic, think more Deadliest Catch, than Pirates of the Caribbean. So why do these romanticized depictions endure? Simple. They tap into a universal yearning for adventure, a desire to escape the humdrum of daily life and sail into the unknown. The sea, with its vastness and unpredictability, serves as a perfect metaphor for the human journey. It's the ultimate stage for stories of heroism and hardship, where the stakes are as high as the waves. But beneath the romance lies a cold, hard truth. The sailors who lived these stories weren't chasing stardom. They were chasing survival, driven by economic necessity and the harsh realities of their time. The modern perception of a sailor's Christmas is often a pastiche of these romanticized tales, tinged with nostalgia for a simpler, more adventurous era. But the truth is, Christmas at sea was less about spreading cheer and more about spreading the meager rations to last another day. The reality was harsh. the conditions unforgiving. It was a world where a sailor's Christmas bonus might be an extra ration of grog, or if they were lucky, a scrap of fresh meat. Yet, amidst the hardships, there was a camaraderie born of shared adversity, a bond that transcended the confines of the ship. Today, we might romanticize these tales, but they hold valuable lessons about resilience and the human spirit. The sailors of yore faced challenges that would make most of us quiver in our boots, yet they pressed on, driven by a determination to carve out a better life. Their stories remind us that the human spirit is as indomitable as the ocean itself, capable of weathering the fiercest storms. As we reflect on the legacy of those who braved the winter seas, it's clear that their stories are more than just historical footnotes. They are a testament to the enduring human desire to celebrate, even in the bleakest circumstances. In a world where uncertainty was the norm, Christmas at sea was a moment of respite, a chance to find joy amidst the chaos. It was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit could shine as bright as the North Star guiding them home. So, as we conclude our journey through the waves of history, let's carry forward the lessons of those who dared to dream beyond the horizon. Their stories are a reminder that life, much like the sea, is unpredictable and often treacherous. Yet, with courage and camaraderie, we can navigate its challenges. The next time you sit down to a holiday feast, spare a thought for those who celebrated in the shadow of the mast, their legacy a beacon of hope and resilience for generations to come. And remember, whether on land or sea, the true measure of the season lies not in material wealth, but in the connections we forge and the spirits we uplift. Here's to the sailors of the past and the adventurers of the future. May their stories continue to inspire us to brave our own storms with courage and grace. You're standing in the muddy, claustrophobic streets of early 17th century England, where the air smells faintly of revolution and a strong whiff of unwashed humanity. Welcome to a world where the word, freedom, is tossed around like a hot potato, except this potato might get you burned at the stake. England, circa 1600, is a bit of a hot mess. King James is on the throne, and if you think he's all about charm and diplomacy, think again. He's got a thing against those pesky religious dissenters who dare to think differently. Aka you and your merry band of pilgrims. So why are you, a perfectly sensible person, selling the roof over your head for a one-way ticket on a rickety ship called the Mayflower? Well, the Church of England's idea of a Sunday service doesn't quite match yours. You're part of a group called the Separatists, and you've been dreaming of a place where you can pray without the fear of a royal smackdown. But it's not just about religion. There's a little thing called economics, and it's about as friendly as a porcupine in a balloon factory. Financially, things are tight. You and the rest of your crew have been scraping together funds like kids at a lemonade stand, but it turns out the adults running the show want some serious coin. The voyage to the New World isn't cheap. Think of it as booking an all-inclusive resort, except the amenities are seasickness and scurvy. You're in cahoots with a group of London financiers, the Virginia Company, who are more than happy to front the money. Of course, they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They expect a return on their investment. The Mayflower's ticket price, a cool £5 per passenger, which might not seem like much now, but was a small fortune back then. Plus, there's the matter of supplies. You're not packing sunscreen and beach towels. It's all about dried meat and barrels of beer. Because let's face it, when fresh water turns into a microbial cocktail, ale is your best bet for not dying of dysentery. Once you've sold your home and kissed the ground goodbye, it's off to the port of Southampton. The Mayflower, your future sea chariot, is waiting. But hold your horses, or rather, your sea legs, because the Mayflower isn't exactly a luxury liner. Originally a merchant ship, it's been repurposed to carry 102 passengers, plus a crew of about 30. Cramped doesn't cover it. Imagine a can of sardines, except the sardines have opinions and bardy odor. Hygiene on board is what you'd call optional. There's no running water, and bathing is a distant memory. You're sharing a space the size of a small studio apartment with dozens of people who haven't had a proper wash since King James was in diapers. Privacy. Forget it. The only place you can be alone with your thoughts is when you're hanging over the side, feeding the fish with your breakfast. Now, let's chat about the real reasons you're risking it all for a slice of the New World. Sure, there's the religious freedom angle, but there's also the allure of land. In England, Land equals power, and you're more likely to stumble upon a unicorn than snag a piece of property. Across the Atlantic, however, there's a whole continent waiting, chock full of untapped resources and free real estate. At least, that's the sales pitch. The reality, you're heading into a wilderness where the rulebook is unwritten and survival is the name of the game. The romantic tales of America as a land of milk and honey are about as realistic as a fairy tale. The harsh truth is, you're venturing into territory where the winter winds are sharp enough to cut through bone, and the local wildlife isn't exactly rolling out the red carpet. So here you are, a dreamer with a dubious plan, a traveler aboard a wooden tub that's seen better days. The Atlantic Ocean stretches out before you, a vast, unpredictable expanse that promises both freedom and peril. As the Mayflower sets sail, the horizon beckons with a promise, a new beginning if you can survive the journey. As the Mayflower cuts through the choppy Atlantic waves, you quickly realize that the romantic notion of adventure on the high seas is about as accurate as a cat's promise to start knocking things off tables. The reality is far less glamorous. Cramped quarters are the order of the day, and you're sharing a space just big enough for a generous sneeze with a hodgepodge of humanity. The Pilgrims, with their religious zeal, aren't alone on this nautical joyride. They're joined by the so-called strangers, a diverse group of craftsmen, merchants, and other non-separatists. These folks were tossed into the mix by the venture's financiers, eager to hedge their bets with some practical skills. After all, prayer and piety are great, but they won't exactly build a colony. Now, let's get real about living conditions. You're packed like sardines in the ship's 'tween deck, an area that's neither spacious nor particularly well ventilated. Forget about standing up straight, unless you're under 4 feet tall. You're doing the sailor's version of a crouched limbo. The quarters are dimly lit and damp, with the smell of unwashed bodies mingling with the salty sea air. If you're prone to claustrophobia or have a sensitive nose, well, good luck. Then there's the delightful matter of seasickness, a condition that turns even the most stoic traveler into a queasy, green-faced mess. With waves that could rival a roller coaster, the ocean's constant upheaval makes keeping your stomach contents where they belong a Herculean task. This is where the ship's cuisine comes into play. Meet the high-calorie hero of the sea, hardtack. This rock-hard biscuit is your primary sustenance, beloved for its long shelf life and despised for its jaw-breaking texture. It's like chewing on a piece of history, literally. Packed with calories, it's designed to keep you going when fresh food is a distant memory. Just try not to think about the weevils that often come as a protein-packed surprise. Navigating the Atlantic isn't exactly a Sunday drive. The Mayflower's crew relies on a mix of maps, compasses, and pure sailor's intuition. There's no GPS to guide them, just the stars, and a prayer that they're not about to sail straight off the edge of the map. In fact, the journey takes a grueling 66 days, with the crew battling not only the elements, but also the growing tension among passengers. It's a high-stakes game of patience and endurance, where every day is a gamble with Mother Nature. Amidst the heaving seas and cramped quarters, there's a brewing political storm. The Mayflower Compact, often painted as a noble step in self-governance, was more of a survival strategy. With tensions rising between the Pilgrims and the strangers, there's a real threat of chaos once land is in sight. The Compact is a social contract, a promise to play nice and stick together, ensuring nobody gets the bright idea to go rogue the moment they hit dry land. It's about keeping the peace, and let's be honest, avoiding the risk of a mutiny that might end with someone taking an impromptu swim. So, as you rock side to side with the rhythm of the sea, you're not just battling the elements. You're navigating a social minefield, a test of wills, and a quest for survival where every biscuit, every argument, and every wave could tip the balance. The stakes are as high as the waves, and your success depends on finding common ground with your fellow travelers, even if it's just agreeing on who gets the least damp corner of the deck. The horizon promises a new beginning, but first, you've got to survive the journey, the politics, and the hard reality of life at sea. With each creak of the Mayflower's timbers, you edge closer to the unknown, driven by faith, hope, and a fair bit of stubbornness. And just like that, after what felt like an eternity of saltwater-soaked misery, someone shouts those magical words, "Land ho!" But don't crack open the celebratory ale just yet. It's not exactly a tropical paradise. You've hit Cape Cod in November, and let me tell you, it's less welcome to the new world, and more. Surprise, you're in nature's freezer. The Pilgrims are greeted not by fields of gold, but by a landscape that's more rugged than a lumberjack's beard and just as unforgiving. The first order of business upon landing is to figure out where on earth you've actually ended up. Spoiler alert, it's not Virginia, the intended destination. Thanks to some navigational hiccups, you're way off course. But hey, who needs a map when you've got the spirit of adventure, right? This coastal detour means you're stuck in a part of the continent that hasn't exactly rolled out the red carpet. Welcome to Cape Cod, where the winds are harsh, the land is rocky, and winter is about as friendly as a cornered raccoon. As you stagger onto the beach, shivering in the bone-chilling wind, you're not just feeling the cold, you're feeling the weight of survival. Nearly half the Mayflower's passengers are already struggling with illness, weakened by the brutal Atlantic crossing. The prospect of building a new life suddenly seems about as promising as a snowball's chance in hell. But here's where things get interesting. Enter the Wampanoag people, the original hosts of this frigid party. The Pilgrims' first encounters with these indigenous inhabitants are a mix of awe, awkwardness, and a hefty dose of caution. The Wampanoag, led by Chief Massasoit, are no strangers to European visitors. Having dealt with traders and fishermen before, they've seen what happens when these pale-faced newcomers get a little too comfortable. However, the Pilgrims' pitiful condition must have been a sight. Imagine a group of bedraggled, half-starved folks stumbling around, trying to make sense of their new reality. Not exactly intimidating. The initial interactions are tentative. The Pilgrims are wary, and for good reason. They are the strangers in a strange land, and the Wampanoag have a history of dealing with outsiders who didn't always play nice. But necessity is the mother of cooperation, and both groups have something the other needs. The Pilgrims need food and local know-how, while the Wampanoag are looking for allies against rival tribes. It's not exactly a match made in heaven, but it's a practical alliance that's about to be tested in the crucible of New England's winter. Speaking of winter, let's talk about the first one. The Pilgrims, bless their optimistic hearts, are woefully unprepared for what's coming. Nearly half of them, 45 out of 102, won't survive those first brutal months. Disease runs rampant, likely a lethal cocktail of scurvy, pneumonia, and tuberculosis, claiming lives faster than you can say, pass the hardtack. The living conditions are dire. Their hastily built shelters offer little protection against the elements, and food is scarcer than a warm bath. Yet, amid this grim reality, there are glimmers of hope. A few lucky breaks, like the fortuitous discovery of a stash of corn buried by the Wampanoag, keep starvation at bay. It's a lifeline, a reminder that survival often hinges on small strokes of fortune. Then there's Squanto, a member of the Patuxet tribe, who, against all odds, becomes a crucial ally. Having been kidnapped by earlier English explorers and taken to Europe, Squanto speaks English and understands both cultures. He's the Pilgrims' ticket to learning the ropes of this new world, teaching them how to plant corn, fish, and negotiate the tricky local politics. The resilience of the survivors is nothing short of remarkable. They cling to life with a tenacity that's fueled by necessity and a stubborn refusal to let their hardships be the end of their story. By spring, those who remain are a bit more battle-hardened and definitely less idealistic. They've traded the dream of a utopian community for the gritty reality of making it through another day. The Pilgrim's story is one of persistence, of finding strength in the most unlikely places and forming alliances that, while awkward at first, become lifelines. As the earth thaws and the first signs of spring emerge, the Pilgrims know they've weathered more than just a physical storm. They've faced the limits of their endurance, challenged their own beliefs, and learned that the new world is a place where survival isn't guaranteed. It's a place of opportunity, yes, but also one of relentless challenges. The horizon holds promise, but only for those willing to adapt, learn, and sometimes lean on the kindness of strangers. This is the beginning of their American Odyssey, a journey that will test every assumption they've ever held about faith, community, and what it truly means to be free. As the sun rises over Plymouth, the survivors aren't just looking at a new day. They're looking at a new chance, a chance to build, to learn, and perhaps most importantly, to endure. As the sun rises over Plymouth, the survivors aren't just looking at a new day. They're looking at a new chance, a chance to build, to learn, and perhaps most importantly, to endure. Now that you've survived a winter that would make even polar bears shiver, it's time to roll up those sleeves and get down to business. After all, the land isn't going to cultivate itself, and those dreams of a thriving colony need more than just wishful thinking. Hugh Squanto, the man of the hour, whose agricultural prowess is about to turn your fortunes around. Let's talk about Squanto, a name that should ring louder in history books than it does. Imagine being kidnapped, sold into slavery, making your way back home only to find your entire tribe wiped out by disease. Most of us would crumble, but not Squanto. Instead, he becomes the Pilgrims' agricultural savior. He teaches these landlubbers the fine art of growing corn, a crop that's as American as apple pie, except apple pie wouldn't be a thing for another couple of centuries. Corn, on the other hand, becomes the backbone of the Pilgrims' diet and economy, the superfood that'll keep them from keeling over from hunger. The secret to successful corn cultivation. Fish. Squanto shows the Pilgrims how to use fish as fertilizer, planting them alongside the corn seeds. It's a practice that's not only ingenious but also environmentally savvy. Think of it as early organic farming. The fish, rich in nutrients, help the corn grow tall and strong. This kind of knowledge isn't just a lifesaver. It's a game changer. It turns out that corn is more than just a side dish. It's the stepping stone to survival. But wait, there's more. Squanto doesn't stop at corn. He shows them how to fish the local rivers and gather other native plants. This isn't just about filling bellies. It's about creating a sustainable food supply that doesn't rely solely on European methods. The Pilgrims are learning to adapt, to blend the old world with the new, and it's all thanks to the invaluable guidance of a man who had every reason to turn his back on them. Now, as the harvest season rolls around, the Pilgrims are in a much better place than they were a year ago. They're not just surviving, they're starting to thrive. And what's a community to do with a bountiful harvest? Host a feast, of course. Enter the first Thanksgiving, a holiday that's become as American as, well, corn. But before you picture a Raquelian gathering complete with pumpkin pie and cranberry sauce, let's set the record straight. The first Thanksgiving wasn't a national holiday. It was a 3-day festival of feasting and diplomacy. The Pilgrims invited the Wampanoag as a gesture of goodwill and gratitude. About 90 Wampanoag men, led by Chief Massasoit, joined the 50 or so surviving Pilgrims. That's not exactly an intimate dinner party, more like a modest neighborhood cookout. And while turkey might have been on the menu, so were venison, seafood, and whatever else the land and sea had to offer. This feast wasn't just about sharing food, it was about cementing alliances. The Pilgrims needed the Wampanoag as much as the Wampanoag needed the Pilgrims. It was a diplomatic dance, each side trying to ensure the other didn't suddenly decide to change partners. The Wampanoag provided the venison, and the Pilgrims contributed their newfound corn and fish. It was a moment of tentative peace, a chance to breathe and reflect on the precarious balance of their existence. So why do we romanticize it as a harmonious gathering of cross-cultural camaraderie? Because myths make for great stories, and everyone loves a happy ending. The reality, however, was more complex. It was an event born out of necessity, a strategic move in a world where alliances were as fragile as a snowflake on a warm afternoon. And while the Pilgrims are busy breaking bread with their new friends, there's a whole political landscape unfolding around them. The New World is a patchwork of competing interests, with various European powers and native tribes jockeying for position. The Pilgrims are like a small startup in a world dominated by multinational corporations. They need to navigate this web of alliances and tensions carefully, ensuring they don't get crushed in the process. The Pilgrims' relationship with the Wampanoag is crucial, but it's not the only alliance they need to consider. Other tribes, like the Narragansett, are watching with keen interest, and the English settlers in Jamestown are dealing with their own trials. Meanwhile, back across the pond, the financiers are expecting returns on their investment, oblivious to the harsh realities their colonists face. The Pilgrims are caught in a game of geopolitical chess, where every move could mean survival or disaster. As the leaves turn and the chill returns to the air, the Pilgrims find themselves better prepared for the coming winter. They've learned some hard lessons, forged critical alliances, and started to establish a foothold in this unforgiving land. But the story is far from over. The New World is a place of opportunity and danger, where the next chapter could bring prosperity or peril. For now, though, the Pilgrims can take a moment to enjoy the fruits of their labor, knowing full well that the journey is just beginning. So, grab a seat by the fire and pass the venison. The story of the Pilgrims is far from finished. The new world awaits, with its promises and perils, ready to test the mettle of those brave enough to call it home. Stay tuned, because there's more to come. More challenges, more alliances, and maybe even a few more feasts. History, as they say, is written by the survivors, and the Pilgrims have only just begun to pen their tale. As the smoke from the Pilgrims' fires curls up into the New England sky, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Fast forward a few centuries, and what do you see when you crack open an American history textbook? The Pilgrims are often cast as the gritty underdogs, the quintessential bootstrap story that America loves to tell. But like any good tale, the reality is a bit more nuanced. So, what's the real legacy of these plucky settlers? And how did their survival in the New World shape the narrative of a burgeoning nation? The Pilgrim's tale is one of triumph, yes, but it's also a story of trial and error. Their survival wasn't just about pluck and prayer. It was a mix of sheer determination, a few strokes of luck, and some critical alliances. The Mayflower Compact, that oft-celebrated document of self-governance, laid the groundwork for a society built on cooperation, even if it was born out of necessity rather than nobility. It wasn't the grand declaration of democracy it's often painted as, but it was a start, a shaky step toward the idea of a government by the people, for the people. And then there's the matter of myth versus reality, the romantic image of Pilgrims and Native Americans sharing a table in peace and harmony, while heartwarming glosses over the complex and often fraught relationships between settlers and indigenous peoples. For the Wampanoag, the Pilgrims' arrival was a mixed blessing. They gained allies, but also faced the onslaught of European diseases and the long-term impact of colonization. By the time you get to the King Philip's War in 1675, relations had soured to a brutal conflict that decimated both native and settler populations. The economic realities of the Pilgrims' world were no less complex. The idea of a land of opportunity was compelling, but the harsh truth was that survival required more than just hope. It required a shrewd understanding of economics and resource management. The Pilgrims relied on the fur trade, exchanging goods with native tribes and sending pelts back to England. It was a lifeline, a way to pay off debts to their financial backers, who were more concerned with profits than piety. Speaking of financial backers, let's not forget the Virginia Company, those early venture capitalists who bankrolled the Mayflower's voyage. They were in it for the money, not the mission. The return on investment was paramount, and the Pilgrims' survival was as much about keeping the financiers happy as it was about finding religious freedom. The settlers' success in establishing a foothold in the New World set a precedent for future colonial endeavors, encouraging more investment and more voyages, which, of course, led to more settlements and more conflicts. And then there's the darker side of the legacy, the impact on indigenous populations. The arrival of European settlers marked the beginning of a profound and often devastating transformation for Native American societies. The introduction of new diseases, the loss of land, and the cultural upheaval were just the beginning. Over time, the expansion of European settlements would push indigenous peoples further from their ancestral lands, leading to a legacy of displacement and marginalization that echoes through history. So, what does this all mean for the American identity? The Pilgrim's story is woven into the fabric of a nation that prides itself on perseverance and the pursuit of freedom. But it's also a reminder of the complexities and contradictions that come with that narrative. It's a story of survival and success, but also one of struggle and sacrifice. The grit of those early settlers laid the groundwork for what would become a new nation, but it was a foundation built on contested ground. As you sit by the fire, imagining the flicker of the Pilgrim's own flames, consider this. History is a tapestry of tales, each thread a mix of fact and fiction, triumph and tragedy. The Pilgrim's journey to the New World was just the beginning, a small chapter in a much larger story. Their legacy is a reminder that the past is never just black and white, but a complex web of human experiences and ambitions. So, the next time you slice into your Thanksgiving turkey, spare a thought for those early settlers and the indigenous people who shaped their story. Remember that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a reflection of the human spirit, resilient, flawed, and endlessly fascinating. The Pilgrims may not have set out to create a nation, but their survival and settlement were the sparks that lit the fire of what would become the United States. A fire that, much like the Pilgrims themselves, continues to burn with the promise of a new beginning. If you've ever fancied yourself a hero in medieval Europe, striding through cobbled streets with a sword at your side, I'd wager Ratcatcher wasn't the role playing in your daydreams. But for a moment, let's trade in the shiny armor and noble quests for a more pungent reality. Welcome to the gritty, grimy world of medieval rat-catching, where your daily grind is less about glory and more about grime. It's the 14th century, and Europe isn't exactly a postcard of pastoral charm. Urbanization is the name of the game, folks, and cities are growing faster than a teenager's appetite. Picture cities like Paris and London bustling with people, and unfortunately their waste. The streets are narrow, the sanitation is poor, and the smell. Well, it's best not to take a deep breath. You're living in a time when tossing a chamber part out the window is a morning routine, not a criminal offense. And where there's muck, there's mischief. Enter our uninvited guests, rats. These little critters are the medieval city's worst-kept secret. They're everywhere, making themselves right at home in the labyrinth of alleys and cellars. Now, before we start pointing fingers or tails, let's remember that rats aren't just freeloaders, they're opportunists. With cities getting bigger and food storage being, shall we say, suboptimal, rats find medieval Europe to be a veritable buffet. Wheat, barley, rye, you name it, they'll gnaw it. And with every bite, they're not just eating your dinner, they're nibbling away at your livelihood. The economic backdrop of this era isn't exactly forgiving. Most folks are peasants, living on the edge of subsistence. A bad harvest, a bout of plague, or yes, a swarm of ravenous rats could send you spiraling into poverty faster than you can say pestilence. So, controlling these little furballs isn't just a matter of keeping your bread unnibbled. It's about survival. And that's where you, the humble rat catcher, come in, an unsung hero if ever there was one. Your job is thankless, and let's be honest, a bit revolting. Armed with a few rudimentary tools and a stomach of steel, you're trudging through muck and mire, setting traps and laying poison. Sure, some might view you as a necessary nuisance, but in truth, you're a vital cog in the medieval machine. You're the line of defense against disease-riddled rodents, playing a crucial role in keeping the Black Death at bay, or at least trying to. Now, let's not romanticize this profession. The reality, it's dirty, dangerous, and often downright deadly. You're not just dealing with rats, you're battling the bubonic plague, which those rats are only too happy to spread. The Black Death, which pops up around 1347, doesn't come with a warning label. It's a swift, silent killer, claiming the lives of an estimated 25 million people in Europe. That's about a third of the population at the time, if you're counting. So, while your job might not earn you a statue in the town square, it's nothing short of essential. And as for the glamour, well, it's more gutter than glitter. Rat catching doesn't exactly make you the life of the medieval party. You're more likely to get the cold shoulder than a warm handshake. Society might need you, but they don't necessarily want to see you. Your profession is a necessary evil, one that brings you into close contact with the very vermin that symbolize disease and decay. But let's not forget the economic aspect. Sure, you're not raking in the riches, but there's a certain demand for your skills. As cities grow, so too does the rat population, and with it, the need for someone willing to tackle the problem head-on. You might get paid in coin or in kind, a sack of grain or a few chickens, perhaps. It's not a bad gig, considering the alternatives, which often involve back-breaking labor in the fields or a painful apprenticeship under a demanding master. In this bustling medieval landscape, your role is a delicate balance of necessity and disdain. You're a guardian of grain stores, a protector of public health, yet always teetering on the edge of acceptance. It's a paradox that defines the era, a time when the burgeoning cities of Europe are both a beacon of progress and a breeding ground for pestilence. As a rat catcher, you stand at the intersection of these opposing forces, a reminder that sometimes the heroes of history are the ones who get their hands, and everything else a little dirty. So, as you navigate the meandering streets and sewage-strewn alleys, remember that your work, however grim, is crucial. Without you, the medieval city would crumble under the weight of its own squalor. You're part of the uncelebrated backbone that keeps society from slipping into chaos. Just don't expect any fanfare or feasts in your honor. After all, When you're up to your elbows in rats, there's not much room for applause. Ah, the life of a medieval rat catcher. Less of a career path and more of a grim necessity. Let's dive deeper into the day-to-day slog that defined this job. Because, let's face it, no one's signing up for this gig just for the love of the chase. Your workspace, not exactly an ergonomic office. You're trudging through muddy streets, crawling into cramped corners, and dodging the contents of chamber parts that, let's be honest, haven't been aiming for the designated dumping area. Your toolkit, a fine collection of rudimentary devices that make the modern mouse trap look like a piece of high-tech wizardry. Let's start with the humble rat trap. It's a simple contraption, often made of wood, with a metal spring and a wire trigger. Essentially, it's a medieval version of a booby trap, but one that's more likely to catch your finger than anything else if you're not careful. You'd also have your trusty sack, because, believe it or not, some of the work is good old-fashioned manual labor. That's right, you're literally grabbing rats with your bare hands, and let's just say, they're not exactly thrilled about the encounter. Now, if you're feeling fancy and have a bit of coin to spare, or perhaps manage to barter some fresh cheese from a grateful townsperson, you might invest in a few poisons. Arsenic is a popular choice, though it's not exactly selective about its victims. Use it sparingly because, well, you don't want to be the reason the baker's cat started acting a bit too lethargic. And let's not forget about the ferrets. Yes, that's right, ferrets. These slinky little creatures were sometimes employed to flush out rats from their hiding spots. It's a bit like sending in a furry commando unit, and it's just as chaotic as it sounds. Yet, for all the scrabbling and scavenging, your earnings are meager at best. In a good week, you might pocket a few pence or receive payment in kind, a loaf of bread here, a pitcher of ale there. In an economy where every penny counts, you're not exactly living the high life. But hey, at least you're not working the fields, breaking your back under the hot sun for a lord who's more interested in his next banquet than your well-being. Socially, you're about as popular as a bout of dysentery. It's not that people don't need you. It's just that they'd rather not think about the fact that they do. You're a constant reminder of the vermin that scuttle just out of sight, and by extension, the diseases they carry. The Black Death didn't exactly help your reputation, either. As unfair as it is, some folks might even blame you for not catching those rats fast enough to prevent the next outbreak. It's a case of shooting the messenger, or in this case, the catcher. However, the necessity of your work can't be overstated. In an urban landscape where sanitation is practically non-existent, rats multiply faster than you can say contagion. They're the original gate crashers of grain stores, gnawing through sacks and leaving a trail of destruction and droppings in their wake. Every rat you catch means less food lost to these furry freeloaders, which in turn means fewer hungry mouths to feed in a society teetering on the brink of famine. Despite all this, there's a certain grim satisfaction in the work. It's not glorious, and it's certainly not clean, but there's an undeniable thrill to outsmarting a creature that's survived for millennia. You're part of a gritty, uncelebrated fraternity, the unsung defenders of the medieval cityscape. Each day is a battle of wits, a test of endurance, and a reminder that sometimes the dirtiest jobs are the most critical. So, as you slink through the cobbled streets, sacks slung over your shoulder and traps in hand, remember that you're more than just a rat catcher. You're a guardian of the granaries, a silent sentinel against the tide of pestilence. It's a thankless task, sure, but in a world where survival depends on the small victories, every rat caught is a tiny triumph. Just don't expect any monuments to be erected in your honor. After all, history might be written by the victors, but it's often lived by the vermin chasers. And yet, as you navigate the medieval metropolis with your trusty sack and traps, let's pause to consider the real kicker, the health risks. Rat catching wasn't just a grimy job, it was a hazardous one. We're talking about a role that put you on the front lines of the medieval health crisis, except instead of scrubs and face masks, you had rough-spun tunics and calloused hands. And the enemy? Well, it came with beady eyes and a tail. Now, let's dive into the delightful details of the Black Death. This wasn't your garden variety epidemic. It was more like the rock star of pandemics, making its grand entrance around 1347 and sweeping through Europe with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. The bubonic plague, spread by fleas hitching rides on rats, was a brutal affair. Imagine waking up with a headache and a fever, only to find your lymph nodes swelling like they'd suddenly decided to join a bodybuilding contest. These buboes, as they were called, could turn black and ooze pus. Yeah, it's as pleasant as it sounds. For you, the rat catcher, this was more than just a distant threat. You were knee-deep in the very environment that bred these diseases. Every rat you caught was a potential carrier of the Yersinia pestis bacterium, the real villain behind the Black Death. And here's the kicker. Handling these rats wasn't exactly a sterile procedure. Forget gloves and antiseptic wipes. You were lucky if your hands were merely grimy and not sporting the latest in medieval infections. The societal perception of your profession was a mixed bag, to say the least. On one hand, you were seen as a necessary evil, the person who kept the rat population in check, and by extension, the plague at bay. On the other hand, some folks might have looked at you sideways, wondering if you weren't somehow in cahoots with the disease. After all, you were always seen with those disease-riddled rodents, and medieval logic wasn't exactly known for its nuance. Now, let's tackle the myth of the heroic rat catcher. Sure, it might sound romantic to think of yourself as a lone warrior against the tide of pestilence, but the reality was far less glamorous. For starters, the tools of your trade weren't exactly the stuff of legend. Traps were rudimentary at best, poisons were indiscriminate, and ferrets, though effective, were more chaotic than controlled. You were more like a beleaguered janitor in the grand scheme of public health, cleaning up messes as best you could. And speaking of messes, let's not forget the unintentional spread of the very disease you were trying to combat. That's right. While you were out there catching and disposing of rats, you could have easily been unwittingly ferrying fleas from one place to another. It's the kind of irony that would be hilarious if it weren't so tragic. Imagine thinking you're saving lives, only to find out you might be part of the problem. Economically, the Black Death was a double-edged sword. On one hand, fewer people meant less competition for resources. On the other hand, it also meant a sharp decline in demand for goods and services, including rat catching. Yet, those who survived found themselves in a slightly better position, economically speaking. With fewer mouths to feed, those lucky enough to avoid the plague might have found their coin going a bit further, assuming, of course, they could still find someone alive to trade with. Politically, the plague was a great equalizer, striking princes and paupers alike. It destabilized entire regions, leading to shifts in power and social upheaval. And you, the humble rat catcher, were right in the middle of it all, a silent witness to the chaos swirling around you. Despite the grim circumstances, there was a certain power in your position. You were a part of the critical infrastructure, a cog in the medieval machine that kept the wheels of society turning, however creakily. In this swirling maelstrom of disease and death, it was easy to romanticize the idea of the rat catcher as a hero. After all, everyone loves a good underdog story. But the truth was more complicated. You weren't a knight in shining armor. You were a survivor, plain and simple. Your job wasn't about glory, it was about grit. It was about waking up each day, picking up your tools, and doing what needed to be done. Heroism was a luxury you couldn't afford, not when survival was at stake. So, where does that leave us? In a world teetering on the brink of collapse, you were a reminder of the thin line between order and chaos. Your work, however thankless, was vital to the fragile balance of medieval life. And while history might not remember the names of those who toiled in the shadows, it was their efforts that laid the groundwork for the cities of the future. You were a part of something larger, even if that something was a pestilent, plague-riddled patchwork of humanity. As we delve deeper into this tale of rats and resilience, remember that the story of the medieval rat catcher isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the delicate dance of survival, the interplay between human ingenuity and the natural world. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's a light to be found in the most unexpected places, even if that light is just a reflection off a rat's eye. Stay tuned, because the saga continues. So, let's shake off the medieval dust and dive into the political labyrinth that was rat catching. You see, being a medieval rat catcher wasn't just a solo gig for the faint of heart. It was also a dance with city regulations, and occasionally an entanglement with guilds. Ah, guilds, those medieval supergroups that turned professions into something of a members-only club. Think of them as the original LinkedIn, but with fewer inspirational posts and more control over who got to call themselves a professional. In cities like London or Paris, the local government wasn't just twiddling its thumbs while the rat population boomed. They introduced regulations to keep the rat-catching profession from devolving into a free-for-all. Picture a world where anyone with a stick and a sack could claim they were a rat-catcher. Chaos, right? So, regulations were designed to ensure that rat-catchers weren't just random folks with a penchant for pest control, but actually knew what they were doing, or at least had a vague idea. Some cities went so far as to issue licenses, essentially turning rat-catching into an early form of regulated profession. If you wanted to catch rats for a living, you either needed the city's blessing or a really persuasive argument. This wasn't just about keeping standards high, it was about control. The authorities wanted to ensure that the rat catchers were competent enough not to accidentally cause more harm than good. After all, nobody wanted a pest control specialist who was actually spreading the plague faster than they could catch it. Now, let's talk guilds. These were the medieval answer to professional associations, setting standards, training apprentices, and generally ensuring that the trade remained in respectable hands, or as respectable as rat-catching hands could be. In some places, rat-catchers formed their own guilds, a band of brothers united by their shared battle against the rodent invasion. While not as glamorous as the goldsmiths or as essential as the bakers, they carved out their niche in the urban ecosystem. But let's not kid ourselves. Joining a rat-catcher's guild wasn't exactly a ticket to high society. It was more like being part of a secret club that nobody really wanted to join, but everyone needed. And while the guilds helped establish a standard of practice, they also acted as gatekeepers, controlling who could enter the profession and who was left to fend for themselves. It was a delicate balance between maintaining quality and protecting the livelihoods of those already entrenched in the grimy trenches of rat-catching. Speaking of grimy, let's sprinkle in some anecdotes about famous rat-catchers, because who doesn't love a good tale? Take, for instance, the legendary Balthasar Baumgartner, a rat-catcher in 17th century Germany, who claimed he could charm rats out of their hiding spots with a flute. Sound familiar? Yeah, this tale has echoes of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, a myth that's been mythologized more times than a Hollywood reboot. But unlike the Piper, Baumgartner didn't lead rats to a watery grave. His methods were more about relocating the rodents, although how effective this was is anyone's guess. Then there's Jack Black, the self-proclaimed rat and mole destroyer to Her Majesty, who plied his trade in Victorian Britain. His flamboyant persona and knack for showmanship turned rat-catching into something of a spectacle. Black was known to wear a waistcoat made of rat skins. Talk about making the best of a bad situation. While he operated long after the medieval period, his story highlights how the profession's image evolved over time, from a necessary evil to a peculiar form of entertainment. The tales of these larger-than-life characters are often colored with a touch of romance, the idea that rat-catchers were part magician, part hero. But the reality was decidedly less enchanting. For every legendary rat whisperer, there were countless others slogging away in anonymity, battling not just the rats, but the perceptions that came with the job. You see, society's view of rat-catchers was a double-edged sword. Yes, they were necessary, but they were also a constant reminder of the filth and disease lurking just beneath the surface of urban life. And let's not overlook the economic angle. The demand for rat-catchers ebbed and flowed with the rat population, which in turn was influenced by everything from crop yields to climate. A particularly harsh winter might see rats seeking refuge in the heart of the city, boosting business for a rat catcher, but also raising the stakes and the risks. In lean times, the competition among rat catchers could be as fierce as any medieval market squabble, with each trying to outdo the other in their quest for that next job. This brings us to the mythologization of the rat catcher as a sort of urban legend. While it's tempting to imagine rat catchers as solitary figures, bravely venturing into the dark corners of the city, the truth was more mundane. They were tradespeople, plain and simple, eking out a living in a world that was often indifferent to their struggles. Yet the stories persisted, because who doesn't love a good yarn about an underdog triumphing against all odds, even if that underdog happens to be chasing actual vermin? As we peel back the layers of history, it's clear that the rat catchers of medieval Europe weren't just dealing with rodents. They were navigating a complex web of social, economic, and political dynamics, all while trying to keep their heads above water, or more accurately, above the muck and mire. They were the unsung heroes of the medieval city, the ones who kept things running even when everything threatened to fall apart. So, next time you hear a tale of a rat catcher who charmed rodents with a flute or darned a waistcoat made of rat skins, remember the grit behind the glamour. These stories are a testament to the human capacity for resilience, a reminder that sometimes the most banal of professions can bear witness to the most extraordinary of times. And as we venture further into this historical narrative, let's keep our eyes open for the unexpected twists and turns that history has to offer. Because, like the rats themselves, you never quite know what's lurking just around the corner. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. So, as we bring our medieval rodent saga to a close, let's take a moment to ponder what happened after the rats scurried off into the annals of history, leaving behind their frazzled pursuers. The legacy of medieval rat catchers is a peculiar tapestry of grit, grime, and, surprisingly, evolution. You see, the profession didn't simply vanish with the advent of modern sanitation. It morphed, adapted, and in some ways found new life in a world that finally realized the importance of public health. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll see the rat catchers' descendants in action during the Victorian era, when cities like London were still grappling with their own rodent invasions. By this time, the romanticized figure of the rat catcher had all but faded, replaced by professionals armed with early chemical pesticides and a more scientific understanding of disease transmission. Gone were the days of ferrets and flute playing. Instead, pest control became a burgeoning industry, with regulations and standards that would make a medieval rat catcher's head spin. Let's talk numbers because, after all, the devil is in the details. By the mid-19th century, London alone was home to an estimated 5 million human residents and countless rats. This was a city still struggling with sanitation issues, despite the advent of sewers and sanitation reforms. Enter the rat catchers, now rebranded as pest control experts, equipped with arsenals of poisons like phosphorus paste, which, while effective, was about as selective as a medieval rat trap. The market for pest control services grew steadily, with professionals charging anywhere from a few shillings to several pounds, depending on the scale of the infestation. The perception of rats themselves began to shift too. No longer just seen as filthy vermin, they became subjects of scientific study. The understanding of rats as vectors for disease evolved, thanks in part to discoveries like the identification of the Yersinia pestis bacterium and its role in the spread of the Black Death. Suddenly, rats weren't just nuisance animals. They were critical to understanding and controlling epidemics. This shift in perception had a ripple effect on the profession of rat catching, which now had a touch of scientific credibility. Let's not forget the cultural impact of rats and their exterminators. Stories like that of the Pied Piper continue to haunt the popular imagination, a whimsical echo of a much less charming reality. In literature and folklore, rats became symbols of chaos and decay, while rat catchers, though occasionally heroic, were often cast as shadowy figures lurking on the fringes of society. Even Charles Dickens couldn't resist weaving rat-infested scenes into his depictions of London's gritty underbelly. As we wade through the modern era, pest control has transformed into a sophisticated field. The romantic notion of the lone rat catcher has been replaced by teams of trained professionals wielding state-of-the-art technology. We're talking about infrared cameras, ultrasonic repellers, and eco-friendly poisons, all aimed at keeping the rat population in check. In the United States alone, the pest control industry rakes in over $9 billion annually. That's a far cry from a few chickens or a sack of grain, isn't it? Yet, even with all these advancements, the rat's resilience remains impressive. New York City, for instance, is home to an estimated 2 million rats, about 1 rat for every 4 humans. And while modern pest control methods are far more effective than those of the medieval era, the battle is far from over. In many ways, the legacy of medieval rat catchers lives on, not just in the methods we use, but in the very necessity of their work. The story of human versus rat is a testament to our constant struggle for dominance over nature, a reminder that despite all our progress, some battles remain timeless. The transformation of the rat catcher's role reflects broader societal changes, from the rise of urbanization to the evolution of public health. It's a story that underscores the delicate balance between human ingenuity and the natural world, highlighting how necessity drives innovation, even in the realm of pest control. And while the rat catchers of yore might not have monuments erected in their honor, their contribution to the fabric of urban life is undeniable. So, as we wrap up this tale of medieval muck and modern marvels, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the unsung heroes who trudged through the filth so that we might tread more comfortably. The rat catchers of history may not have been knights in shining armor, but they were warriors in their own right, fighting a battle that continues to this day. And as we ponder their legacy, we're reminded that sometimes the dirtiest jobs are the most indispensable, proving once again that history is often written in the margins and lived by those who dare to get their hands dirty. Cheers to the rat catchers, because in their story lies a lesson in resilience, resourcefulness, and the relentless march of progress. You stumble into the medieval alchemist's lab, and it's like stepping into the aftermath of a thunderstorm that forgot to end. There's a pungent, almost theatrical scent of sulfur hanging in the air, and glassware is scattered across every available surface. Welcome to the Middle Ages version of a scientific wonderland, or perhaps a chaotic circus act where every trick involves something that can blow up. Let's start with the glassware. It's everywhere, glinting in the dim morning light, streaming through a small, grimy window. Those alembics, retorts, and crucibles aren't just for show. They're the tools of the trade, each piece costing more than a year's worth of bread for the average peasant. A decent alembic could set you back 50 shillings, which might not sound like much unless you consider that the average annual income in the 14th century hovered around that same mark. So, this isn't just clutter. It's an investment, a testament to the alchemist's ambition, or folly, depending on your perspective. Now, let's talk fumes. Breathing here feels less like respiration, and more like playing Russian roulette with your lungs. The air is thick with the acrid smell of burning mercury and sulfur. If you're lucky, maybe some cinnamon to mask the stench, but don't get your hopes up. The alchemist believes that each wisp of smoke holds the promise of transmuting base metals into gold, or at the very least, some kind of metallic enlightenment. The reality, it's likely to give you a headache that feels like a medieval torture device has taken up residence in your skull. The lab itself is a tightrope walk of precarious balances. One wrong move and that carefully stacked tower of glassware could come crashing down, taking a month's worth of work, and its potential profits with it. The alchemist must have the dexterity of a juggler and the patience of a monk. Speaking of monks, they often doubled as alchemists, moonlighting from their religious duties to dabble in the mysteries of the physical world. Not exactly what you'd expect from those sworn to spiritual enlightenment, right? And then there's the economic context. Why would anyone endure this chaos? The short answer: greed, curiosity, and a dash of desperation. Transforming lead into gold isn't just a catchy tagline. It's the medieval equivalent of winning the lottery. Dream of endless wealth and the allure of eternal life, thanks to the elusive philosopher's stone, motivated many to pour their fortunes into this smoky endeavor. But let's be real. The odds of striking gold, or finding the elixir of life, were about as likely as a knight in shining armor riding through the door to save the day. The costs of running such an operation were staggering. Ingredients like gold, silver, and rare herbs weren't exactly lying around in the town square. They required connections, travel, and a hefty pouch of coins. And let's not forget the apprentices, who were basically the medieval version of unpaid interns. They worked tirelessly, often in hazardous conditions, for the mere chance to learn these secrets, and maybe, just maybe, strike it rich themselves someday. As for hygiene, let's just say it wasn't high on the priority list. Medieval standards were about as low as that barrel of spent potash in the corner. The alchemist might have been more concerned with the purity of their concoctions than the cleanliness of their hands. After all, a little dirt never hurt anyone, except when it did, which was often. Diseases ran rampant, and the lab wasn't immune to the grim realities of medieval life. But in the alchemist's mind, the dirt was just another element in their grand experiment. Alchemists justified their dubious practices with a mix of science, philosophy, and sheer stubbornness. Some genuinely believed they were on the brink of a breakthrough that would change the world. Others were more akin to snake oil salesmen, peddling dreams to the desperate. It was a world where science and mysticism blurred, a place where logic took a backseat to the tantalizing promise of the impossible. So here you are, trapped in a room that feels more like a ticking time bomb than a laboratory. It's a testament to human ambition and folly, a place where dreams of wealth clash with the harsh realities of medieval life. The Alchemist's lab is a chaotic symphony of ambition, danger, and the eternal quest for knowledge, or at least a quick path to riches. As the morning light shifts, the chaotic dance of glassware and fumes continues, each moment a precarious balance between discovery and disaster. As the midday sun filters through the grimy glass, casting long shadows across the cluttered workbench, let's jump into the Alchemist's grand obsession, the Philosopher's Stone. No, we're not talking about a magical rock from a fantasy novel, but an enigmatic substance that medieval alchemists believed could turn lead into gold and grant immortality. Quite the ambitious goal, don't you think? The Philosopher's Stone was the ultimate medieval jackpot, a tantalizing blend of science fiction and philosophy that set imaginations and a few cauldrons on fire. Alchemists weren't just mystical wizards waving wands around. Think of them as the Middle Ages version of research scientists, albeit with a penchant for mystical mumbo-jumbo. They were the forefathers of modern chemistry, poking and prodding at the elements with what they had: rudimentary knowledge, boundless ambition, and an alarming lack of safety protocols. The materials they used were as dangerous as they were intriguing. Mercury and sulfur were their bread and butter, but throw in a dash of arsenic, and you've got yourself a medieval cocktail that could knock out an ox. Handling these substances was a bit like inviting disaster over for tea, only disaster rarely left without leaving a mark. Let's talk mercury. Today, it's known for its toxic properties, but back then, it was a staple of the alchemical diet. Alchemists believed mercury's liquid metallic form held a secret to transformation. Newsflash from the 21st century. Prolonged exposure to mercury isn't exactly a recipe for good health. But hey, what's a little mercury poisoning compared to the possibility of unlimited wealth and eternal life? Sulfur, on the other hand, was considered the fiery spirit of transformation, ready to burn away impurities. The reality: it mostly just turned the lab into a smoky sauna with a smell that could peel paint. Now, arsenic might sound like a poison straight out of a murder mystery, but for alchemists, it was another tool in their kit. It was believed to hold transformative powers, despite its tendency to, well, be lethal. The concoctions they whipped up would make a modern chemist's hair stand on end. Yet, in the alchemist's mind, these elements were pieces of a cosmic puzzle, each with its role in the grand experiment of life and death. But let's not romanticize this too much. These weren't just eccentric professors with a love for danger. The political stakes were high, as kings and nobles often bankrolled these ventures, hoping to fill their coffers with gold without the hassle of taxing their subjects into oblivion. Monarchs like King James Roman IV of Scotland and the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph Roman II dabbled in alchemy, funding labs in the hope of striking it rich. The allure of turning lead into gold was a financial elixir, promising to solve economic woes with a touch of the magical. It was a high-risk investment, with the odds of success about as likely as finding a unicorn grazing in the backyard. The alchemist's lab was a crucible not just for metals, but for ambition. These men, and they were mostly men, were the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs of their day, pitching the medieval equivalent of get-rich-quick schemes to anyone with a purse of coins and a glimmer of hope. The Philosopher's Stone was less about stones and more about dreams, a pursuit that blurred the lines between science, magic, and flat-out wishful thinking. And let's not forget the elixir of life, the alchemist's other holy grail. This mythical potion promised immortality, a tempting offer in an age where the average life expectancy hovered around 35 years. Sure, you'd have to survive a few plagues, wars, and famines along the way, but live forever, and you'd have all the time in the world to figure it out. The quest for the elixir of life was as much about conquering death as it was about understanding life itself. But here's the kicker: none of these alchemists ever found it. Time and again, they were left with nothing more than empty beakers and shattered dreams. So, as the day wears on, and the faint outlines of the Philosopher's Stone and elixir of life dance like mirages through the smoke, it's clear that the alchemist's lab is more than just a place of work. It's a symbol of human aspiration and folly, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge often walks hand in hand with the spectre of failure. With every failed experiment, the alchemists edged closer to modern science, laying the groundwork for future generations to build upon. They were dreamers, yes, but their dreams were the seeds of progress, tangled as they were in the weeds of superstition and mystery. As the shadows lengthen and the fumes continue to swirl, the alchemist remains undeterred, driven by a vision that glimmers just beyond reach. And while they might not have found the secrets to eternal life or infinite wealth, their legacy is one of curiosity and courage, a testament to the enduring human spirit that refuses to settle for the ordinary. So, as you step back from the chaos of the lab, remember, the true magic of alchemy wasn't in the gold they never made, but in the questions they dared to ask. So, as you step back from the chaos of the lab, let's shift gears and dive into the alchemist's social tightrope act. This was a time when dabbling in the secrets of the universe could earn you both admiration and a one-way ticket to a heresy trial. You see, the Middle Ages wasn't exactly a golden era for freethinkers, especially when the church was the omnipresent big brother of the day, keeping a suspicious eye on anything that smelled like magic, or worse, science. Alchemists occupied a precarious spot in the social hierarchy, straddling the line between revered scholars and suspicious sorcerers. The church had a love-hate relationship with them, kind of like that friend you can't help but admire for their genius, but also secretly suspect of cheating at board games. On one hand, alchemists were seen as intellectuals pushing the boundaries of human understanding. On the other, they were feared for their potential to challenge religious doctrines, which was a bit like poking a bear with a particularly heretical stick. In the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas, the philosopher-priest, had tried to make peace between faith and reason, arguing that studying the natural world could actually lead to a better understanding of God. But not everyone was buying what Aquinas was selling. The church's stance was as clear as mud, supportive of scientific inquiry, but only if it didn't stray too far from the theological line. Alchemists, with their bubbling cauldrons and whispers of transmutation, often found themselves teetering on the edge of acceptability. Here's where it gets interesting. Some alchemists managed to thrive by playing both sides like pros in a medieval chess game. Take Roger Bacon, for example. This 13th century Franciscan friar and alchemist was a master of the balancing act. He was a man of faith, and yet his works hinted at the transformative power of alchemy. Bacon's secret. He framed his experiments as a quest for divine enlightenment rather than a challenge to God's creation. By cloaking his scientific curiosity in religious devotion, Bacon managed to dodge the Inquisition's crosshairs and even earn the nickname Dr. Mirabilis, quite the feat in those witch-hunting times. But not everyone was as adept at navigating these turbulent waters. Johannes Trithemius, a Benedictine abbot and alchemist, was accused of sorcery after dabbling a bit too enthusiastically in cryptography, a skill that seemed suspiciously like magic. His reputation took a nosedive faster than you can say abracadabra, proving that even a whiff of the supernatural could land you in hot water. Despite these risks, alchemists left an indelible mark on the path to modern chemistry. Their experiments, often dismissed as fool's errands, were the building blocks of future scientific breakthroughs. While the church frowned upon their more mystical pursuits, the practical applications of their work couldn't be ignored. Alchemists laid the groundwork for metallurgy and the development of laboratory equipment. They were the first to play with acids, laying the foundation for later chemists to refine processes like distillation and crystallization. The term alembic itself comes from the Arabic alambic, and medieval alchemists were among the first in Europe to adopt this technology. The church's unease with alchemy was not just about the potential heresy. It was also deeply entwined with the economics of power. Alchemists promised to create wealth from nothing, a prospect as alluring as it was terrifying to the authorities. If anyone could turn lead into gold, it would upend the entire economic structure, devaluing currency and destabilizing the power dynamics that the church and the nobility so carefully maintained. In this light, alchemists were like the disruptive tech startups of their day, with the potential to transform society in dramatic and unpredictable ways. Take the case of Nicholas Flamel, the 14th century scribe who became a legendary figure in alchemical lore. While history suggests he was more of a savvy real estate investor than a mystical wizard, tales of his supposed success in creating the philosopher's stone spread like wildfire. His posthumous reputation as an alchemist who cracked the code of transmutation only fueled the church's nerves about the unchecked power of alchemical knowledge. Yet, alchemists weren't just rogue elements, were often embedded within the social fabric, with some even holding prestigious positions at court. King James Roman IV of Scotland had his own royal alchemist, John Damien, who attempted to fly from the battlements of Stirling Castle, armed with wings made of chicken feathers. Spoiler alert, he didn't soar to new heights, he crash-landed, earning the nickname the Birdman. But the king's patronage of alchemy highlighted a pragmatic side to these mystical pursuits. Monarchs, ever on the lookout for ways to fill their treasuries, were willing to indulge the fantastical promises of alchemy in the hope of tangible rewards. The influence of alchemy even trickled down to the common folk, who saw alchemists as mysterious figures capable of miracle cures and magical feats. In a world where science was a nascent field, the lines between miracle and medicine were often as blurred as the alchemist's smoke-filled lab. The idea of turning lead into gold might have been a pipe dream, but the allure of alchemy lay in its promise of transformation, of wealth, of health, of the very fabric of life itself. This blend of hope, fear, and fascination kept alchemists in the public eye and under the church's watchful gaze. They were both revered and reviled, a living contradiction in a time when curiosity could be both a blessing and a curse. But for all the church's suspicions, the legacy of alchemy is undeniable. The alchemist's pursuit of knowledge, wrapped in a veil of mysticism, sowed the seeds of modern science. They were the precursors to chemists, their fumbling experiments paving the way for future generations to unravel the mysteries of the natural world. So, as the afternoon light fades and the alchemical fumes dissipate, remember that behind every failed transmutation was a step forward in the grand human quest for understanding. Alchemists were dreamers and doers, navigating a world where knowledge was power and risk was a way of life. Their legacy is one of curiosity, courage, and the relentless pursuit of the unknown, a testament to the enduring spirit of innovation that continues to drive us today. As the afternoon shadows grow long and the alchemical fumes begin to settle like a smoky blanket over the room, we find ourselves at the threshold of a quieter, more cerebral time in the alchemist's day. It's not all about explosions and mystical potions, after all. Even in a medieval lab, where chaos is a constant companion, there's a need for reflection and order, kind of like the medieval version of cleaning up the confetti after a wild party. Now, don't be fooled into thinking this is just a downtime activity. For the alchemist, documenting experiments was as critical as the experiments themselves. These records weren't just scribbles on parchment. They were the lifeblood of alchemical progress. Imagine trying to recreate a breakthrough without a single note to guide you. It'd be like baking a souffle without a recipe, high risk with a strong likelihood of failure. The alchemist, then, is a meticulous record keeper, armed with quill and ink rather than a sleek laptop. Parchment isn't cheap, mind you. It costs about as much as a whole day's labor for a skilled craftsman, so every word counts. These records are filled with symbols and ciphers, a secret language that keeps the uninitiated at bay and protects the alchemist's hard-earned knowledge from prying eyes. Alchemical texts are a bit like Instagram captions with a private account setting, cryptic to outsiders, meaningful to those in the know. Documentation tools back then were a far cry from our digital ease. We're talking ink made from oak galls and iron salts, quills that needed constant sharpening, and parchment that wouldn't hesitate to smear if you weren't careful. Think writing a novel with a feather at hand, and each page costing as much as dinner at a fancy restaurant. Yet, despite these challenges, alchemists managed to compile extensive treatises filled with diagrams, recipes, and philosophical musings. These records were meant to be both practical and philosophical, bridging the gap between empirical evidence and mystical speculation. They included detailed measurements, a task that required tools like astrolabes and scales, which were as much about precision as they were about guesswork. For instance, an ounce back then wasn't as standardized as our modern 28, 35 grams. Depending on where you were in Europe, an ounce could vary, making exact a relative term. But alchemical documentation was not just for personal reflection. It was a legacy, a way to pass on knowledge to the next generation, a vital lifeline in a world where the printing press was still a century away from revolutionizing information sharing. Enter the apprentices, the eager but often clueless sidekicks of the alchemical world. These young learners were the medieval equivalent of grad students, toiling away in the hopes of mastering the secrets of alchemy. Apprenticeships were the real educational pathways of the time, more akin to a hands-on boot camp than ivory tower education. Young men, again, mostly men, were taken under the wing of a master alchemist, learning through a mix of observation, instruction, and good old trial and error. The apprenticeship wasn't just about learning chemical processes. It was about absorbing the philosophy and lore that accompanied them. Imagine learning chemistry while also being tutored in ancient Greek philosophy. Because why not combine a little Plato with your Pardash? These apprentices were responsible for the grunt work, gathering ingredients, cleaning equipment, and of course, documenting the master's work. In return, they received room, board, and a front row seat to the alchemical theatrics, when they weren't dodging the occasional explosion. That is, the path from apprentice to master alchemist was long and fraught with challenges, much like climbing a very slippery ladder with one hand tied behind your back. Despite the hardship, apprenticeships were coveted. They offered a chance to rise above one's station, to become not just a craftsman, but an intellectual, a rare opportunity in a society where social mobility was about as common as a unicorn sighting. Alchemists were often part of guilds, which provided a network of support and a badge of legitimacy. These guilds were the LinkedIn of the medieval world, connecting practitioners and offering a semblance of security in a volatile profession. But let's not sugarcoat it. The life of an alchemist or apprentice was as unpredictable as the experiments themselves. Success was elusive, and failure came at both a personal and financial cost. The lab was a crucible of dreams and frustrations, a place where ambition met reality with a resounding clash. In the glow of the evening fire, the alchemist reviews the day's notes, pondering the mysteries that continue to elude him. It's a moment of quiet reflection, a pause in the relentless pursuit of the impossible. As the quill scratches across the parchment, each stroke is a reminder of the delicate balance between knowledge and mystery, progress and peril. As the night deepens, the lab transforms from a stage of chaos to a library of contemplation. It's here, in the quiet hours, that the alchemist's legacy is written, not in the gold that was never made, but in the knowledge that will inspire future generations to dare, to dream, and to discover. And so, the alchemist's day closes not with a bang, but with a whisper, a testament to the enduring spirit of inquiry that defies time and circumstance. As the alchemist's day draws to a close, it's time to step back from the bubbling chaos and reflect on why you, dear listener, might find surviving even a single day in this medieval madhouse more challenging than you'd expect. Let's start with the physical dangers. Remember those exotic concoctions of mercury, sulfur, and arsenic? Well, prolonged exposure to these would make your modern-day health and safety officer weep into their risk assessment forms. Inhaling those toxic fumes was like willingly snorting disaster. And let's not forget the ever-present threat of spontaneous combustion turning your day into an impromptu fireworks display. Alchemists regularly flirted with danger, wielding substances that could kill you quicker than you could say, philosopher's stone. The lack of ventilation in these medieval labs meant you were marinating in a toxic stew of your own making. The only safety equipment around might have been a prayer or two muttered under one's breath. So, unless you've got a penchant for reckless endangerment, you might want to rethink your aspirations of medieval alchemy. Now, moving on to economic pressures, which were as crushing as a medieval tax collector's handshake. The lab wasn't just a place of science, it was a financial black hole. Those alembics and crucibles cost more than a peasant's annual wages, and the ingredients weren't exactly growing on trees, or if they were, only in far-off lands that required a purse full of coin to reach. Imagine your salary going up in smoke, quite literally, with every failed experiment. Alchemists poured fortunes into their work, hoping for a return that was more elusive than a fairy-tale ending. It's a bit like gambling everything on a game of chance where the odds are stacked against you. Except instead of a casino, it's a lab, and instead of chips, you're betting with mercury and hope. And let's not gloss over the social risks. Alchemists walked a tightrope between genius and madness, with society ready to push them off at a moment's notice. The church was keeping tabs on them like a nosy neighbor peeking over the fence. While some alchemists, like Roger Bacon, managed to navigate this with a deft mix of wit and religious rhetoric, others weren't so lucky. Being branded a heretic or a sorcerer was a real possibility, and let's just say that medieval justice wasn't exactly known for its leniency. You'd be one accusation away from a trial that could end with you becoming a cautionary tale for future generations. Despite these daunting realities, alchemists left a legacy that's often overlooked. Their fumbling in the dark laid the groundwork for modern chemistry. While their quest for gold and immortality might not have panned out, they did stumble upon new techniques and discoveries that would eventually light the way for future scientists. Distillation, crystallization, and even early forms of the scientific method were born in the alchemist's lab, hidden beneath layers of mysticism and mercury fumes. What's truly remarkable is how these medieval tinkerers, caught between the worlds of magic and science, managed to plant the seeds of progress. They were the original innovators, turning lead into what would eventually become the gold of scientific understanding. Their work reminds us that the path to enlightenment is often paved with trial, error, and the occasional explosion. So, while you might not survive a day in their world, you can at least tip your hat to their tenacity. In the end, the alchemist's lab was a crucible of ambition, a place where the dreamers of the medieval world dared to challenge the status quo. They were the progenitors of modern chemistry, their experiments a testament to human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of the unknown. As you consider their world, remember that their magic wasn't in the gold they never made, but in the questions they asked and the boundaries they pushed. They may not have found the philosopher's stone or the elixir of life, but they did something perhaps even more magical. They sparked the flame of scientific inquiry that continues to burn brightly today. So, as you close the door on the alchemist's lab and step back into the present, take with you a newfound respect for these early pioneers. They were the dreamers who dared to ask, what if? And in doing so, they changed the course of history. And while you might not last a day in their shoes, or rather, their soot-covered boots, you can appreciate the legacy they left behind. They remind us that in the dance between ambition and reality, even the most fantastical dreams can lead to real-world change. The Egyptian sun has a way of making you feel like a forgotten cookie in a preheated oven. It's early morning, and the desert hasn't yet unleashed its full fury, but don't let that fool you. Sure, the air is cooler than what you'll face by noon, but cool here means a brisk 75 degrees F, 24 degrees C, at its best. You've got a day ahead that could make modern heat waves look like a breezy afternoon at the beach. Forget about a refreshing morning jog, unless you fancy dodging scorpions and dehydration in your workout routine. Let's talk climate. Ancient Egypt wasn't exactly the place for sweater weather. The average summer temperature hovered around 95 degrees F, 35 degrees C, with heat waves easily pushing it over 104 degrees F, 40 degrees C. And no, they didn't have the luxury of air conditioning or even a fan to plug in. It was you, the sun, and a lot of sand, your survival toolkit, a piece of cloth for shade, some questionable water from the Nile, and maybe, just maybe, a fan made of palm leaves if you were feeling fancy. Now, about breakfast. If you're dreaming of a continental spread or a lavish brunch, you're about to be sorely disappointed. Ancient Egyptians might have been big on grain, but we're not talking multi-grain bagels or oatmeal here. Your morning meal would likely consist of a rough bread made from emmer wheat or barley. Forget the concept of gluten-free. It was more like glutenful. Throw in some onions, and if you were really living the high life, a bit of fish caught from the Nile. Yum! The truth is, thinking about breakfast in ancient Egypt is more like pondering a survival strategy than planning a menu. Food preservation was a challenge, and refrigeration was a distant dream. It's no wonder the Egyptians stocked their tombs with food offerings, hoping to feast eternally in the afterlife. Because let's face it, the menu here on Earth left much to be desired. But let's not get too romantic about it. The harsh reality is that food scarcity was a constant threat. The Nile's inundation was critical. Too much or too little water meant famine. A bad flood season could spell disaster, and while the pharaoh might have had his granaries, the common folk weren't always so lucky. So, if you think skipping breakfast is tough, try doing it while wondering if there will be lunch or dinner on the horizon. Speaking of survival, let's address the morning routine, or the lack thereof. Forget about leisurely showering or sipping coffee while scrolling through your phone. Water was a precious commodity, and the idea of wasting it on a shower was as far-fetched as finding Wi-Fi in the desert. You'd be more concerned with staying hydrated enough to avoid passing out before midday. And coffee, dream on. The beverage wouldn't reach Egypt until the 16th century. Your caffeine fix would have to wait a few thousand years. As you navigate your way through this sun-baked landscape, you're constantly on alert for desert critters. Scorpions, snakes, and other less-than-friendly creatures share this arid environment with you, and they aren't the type to back off at the sight of a human. You'd better be nimble on your feet, or you might find yourself on the wrong end of a scorpion's stinger, a sting that could be as deadly as it is painful. Let's not forget about dehydration, your constant companion in this sandy sauna. With humidity levels often below 20%, your body is losing water faster than you can say rah. This isn't the time to be picky about water quality. That murky Nile water, it's your best bet, despite its questionable purity and the occasional crocodile. You'd have to rely on basic filtration methods, sand and cloth, to try and make it somewhat drinkable. And while we're on the subject of water, let's address a common myth. Ancient Egypt wasn't just one endless desert. The Nile was the lifeblood of the region, providing a fertile strip of land that supported agriculture. But venture too far from its banks, and you're in the heart of the Sahara, where the only thing more relentless than the sun is the wind, whipping sand into your eyes and skin like nature's own exfoliation treatment. It's easy to romanticize the pyramids and imagine Egyptian life as a series of grand processions and mystical ceremonies. But for the average person, it was a daily battle against the elements and the odds. The pyramids themselves are testaments to human endurance and ingenuity, not daily life. Think of them as the skyscrapers of their time. Impressive, sure, but not exactly representative of the average Egyptian's experience. You're not contemplating the grandeur of Khufu's pyramid when you're trying to keep sand out of your eyes and food in your belly. You're more concerned with the here and now, which means staying one step ahead of hunger, thirst, and the searing heat. So, as you start this day under the Egyptian sun, remember that surviving even a single day in ancient Egypt's desert isn't for the faint of heart. It's a test of resilience, resourcefulness, and a touch of luck, qualities the ancient Egyptians mastered long before we came along with our air-conditioned comforts. But let's not get too comfortable with our survivalist fantasies just yet. As the sun inches higher, so does the workload of your average ancient Egyptian. Forget about hitting the snooze button. Your commute isn't a drive through rush hour, but a trek across hot sands to the nearest worksite. And for many, that meant the colossal task of pyramid construction, a feat that would make your modern-day house build look like a Lego project. Picture this. You're not just moving stones. You're hauling multi-ton blocks, each weighing as much as 5 tons, with nothing but a simple sled and some good old-fashioned elbow grease. And no, there were no breaks for a quick scroll through social media. Lunch break. Try gnawing on some more of that Hardy Emma wheat bread under the scorching sun, if you're lucky enough to pause. These laborers weren't slaves, as some might think, but paid workers. And by paid, I mean compensated with beer, bread, and onions. Yes, in a twist of fate, your paycheck would disappear faster than you can say, happy hour. And let's talk about beer for a moment, an ancient Egyptian staple. It was more like a thick, nutritious porridge than your crisp, refreshing lager, and it was about as essential as water, given its crucial role in the diet. While the grand pyramids soared into the sky, the lives of those who built them stayed firmly on the ground. Social mobility was about as likely as finding a snowstorm in the desert. Your station was largely determined at birth and climbing the social ladder, more like trying to scale the pyramids themselves. Let's shift gears to the fertile banks of the Nile, where the farmers toiled. If you thought your 9-to-5 was a grind, try farming in ancient Egypt. The Nile's annual inundation was both a blessing and a curse. It deposited nutrient-rich silt, creating arable land, but also dictated a farmer's calendar with an iron fist. Miss the flood, and you might as well be planting seeds in a sandbox. The planting season was short, and the harvest, a race against time and elements. And what did this agrarian paradise produce? Mostly grains like wheat and barley, which were the backbone of the Egyptian economy. Forget about paper money. Grain was the currency of choice. It was both your livelihood and your lifeline, stored in granaries that were as precious as gold. In fact, Ancient Egyptians had a neat little system called barter, a precursor to modern economics, but without the convenience of PayPal. You could trade your grain for goods and services, which sounds charming until you realize that paying your taxes in grain might mean parting with your next meal. The economy was a well-oiled machine, provided the Nile didn't throw a wrench in the works. But when it did, famine loomed large. The pharaoh, seen as a god on earth, was expected to intercede with the divine to ensure prosperity. Yet even divine intervention had its limits. The reality was, if the Nile failed, so did the economy. Now, let's raise a glass to the artisans and craftsmen, the unsung heroes of Egyptian society. These skilled workers crafted everything from jewelry to intricate carvings, contributing to the cultural wealth of Egypt. Their workshops buzzed with activity, producing goods that would be traded far and wide, yet their lives were as bound by the limitations of their era as the farmers and laborers. Social stratification was as rigid as a pharaoh's gaze. The upper echelons enjoyed luxuries that the average Egyptian could scarcely imagine, let alone attain. The idea of climbing the social ladder was more myth than reality. You might have a chance if you caught the eye of someone influential, but that was about as rare as finding a cool breeze in the desert. Let's not forget the bureaucracy, a complex hierarchy that managed everything from agriculture to taxation. Scribes were the linchpins of this system, recording everything with meticulous detail. In a world without computers, their papyrus scrolls and ink were the data centers of the day. But becoming a scribe required education, something not readily available to all. It was a privilege, not a right, further cementing the social divide. So as the sun blazes overhead, think about those who toiled under it, day in and day out. Their lives were a testament to resilience, surviving in a world where nature was as much a benefactor as a foe. And while we might romanticize their achievements, the reality was far from glamorous. It was a life of endurance, of making do with what little you had, and of hoping that tomorrow's sun would be kinder than today's. As your understanding of ancient Egyptian society deepens, remember that their achievements were built on the backs of ordinary people, whose stories are as compelling as the monuments they raised. As the relentless sun climbs to its zenith, you might start to question every decision that led you to this sweltering desert existence. It's noon, the time when the heat cranks up and slaps you across the face with all the subtlety of a sandstorm. If you're picturing yourself lounging under a palm tree with a cool drink, let me pop that bubble right now. Ancient Egypt might conjure images of opulent wealth and power, but the reality was often more about gritty endurance than gilded excess. Let's set the record straight on Egyptian opulence. Sure, the pharaohs decked themselves out like they were auditioning for the role of Sun King long before Louis Roman XIV made it cool. But for the average Joe, or should we say the average Amos, it was a life of making do. You might have heard about the wigs worn by the ancient Egyptians, and you might think, wow, what style. But let's be real. Wearing a wig in the Egyptian heat is about as sensible as wearing a wool sweater to a sauna. Those wigs weren't just fashion statements. They were practical solutions to a head full of lice, which were as common as, well, sand in the desert. Wigs were made from human hair or palm fiber, and they weren't exactly lightweight. Imagine strapping a small, furry animal to your head and then standing under the sun. Not exactly a stroll in the park. The rich had the luxury of perfumed cones of fat that would slowly melt over their wigs, releasing a pleasant aroma as they dripped down. Sounds delightful until you remember it's essentially a slow-motion fondue party on your scalp. But hey, at least you'd smell good while sweating buckets. Fashion in ancient Egypt was as much about survival as it was about style. Linen garments were the go-to, and for good reason. Linen is breathable and light, perfect for a climate that seems designed to roast you alive. The elite might have flaunted colorful patterns and elaborate designs, but for most, clothing was simple and functional. Forget about the Egyptian cotton sheets you might covet today. It was all about practicality. Barefoot was the norm, with sandals reserved for special occasions or those who could afford them. After all, when the ground is essentially a heart plate, you pick your battles. Now, let's talk politics, because nothing quite pairs with unbearable heat like the fiery complexities of power. Pharaohs were both the political and religious leaders of Egypt, seen as living gods on earth. Talk about pressure. Imagine being expected to control not just your kingdom, but also the annual flooding of the Nile. A bad flood season wasn't just a bummer. It was a divine failure. Ruling over a desert sounds glamorous until you consider that your subjects are counting on you to negotiate with the gods for their next meal. Pharaohs had to maintain the delicate balance of mad, the concept of truth, order, and justice. It was their divine duty to ensure that chaos didn't creep into the land. Sounds manageable until you factor in the constant threat of invasions, rebellions, and the odd assassination attempt. Let's face it, being seen as a god has its perks, but it also means you're the go-to scapegoat when things go south. Imagine trying to keep an empire together while sweating through layers of gold and linen, all the while hoping that the gods are on your side. Maintaining such a vast empire wasn't cheap, and the economics of power were as daunting as the desert sun. The ancient Egyptian economy was a complex beast, driven by agriculture, trade, and taxation. Picture a system where grain was currency, and your wealth was literally stored in granaries. The state collected taxes in the form of goods and labor, which funded everything from pyramid construction to military campaigns. The cost of maintaining this empire was astronomical, and the burden often fell on the shoulders of the common folk, who had to part with their grain, time, and sometimes their sanity. Trade was a vital artery of the Egyptian economy, linking them to the wider world. They imported goods like cedar wood from Lebanon, incense from Punt, and copper from Sinai. This network of trade routes was impressive, but it came with its own set of challenges. Caravans had to navigate not just the terrain, but also political tensions and the occasional bandit raid. Who knew that the life of a trader in ancient Egypt could resemble a high-stakes adventure novel, minus the happy ending, while the pharaohs and the elite luxuriated in palatial grandeur. The cost of such opulence was borne by the thousands who toiled in anonymity. The labor force was the backbone of Egyptian society, a vast pool of human resources that kept the wheels of empire turning. And while they might have been compensated with bread and beer, let's not romanticize it. This was grueling work under unforgiving conditions. The grandeur of the pyramids and temples was built on the sweat and sacrifice of these laborers, whose names have been lost to history, but whose impact echoes through the ages. As you stand under the midday sun, it's easy to get swept up in the romance of ancient Egypt, with its towering monuments and tales of divine rulers. But behind the golden veneer lies a story of survival against the odds, of a people who learned to thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. It's a tale of resilience, ingenuity, and the relentless pursuit of balance in a world where chaos was never more than a heartbeat away. So, as you wade through the sands of time, remember that the allure of ancient Egypt isn't just in its legends and lore. It's in the grit and grind of everyday life, in the stories of those who lived and died under the same sun that beats down on you now. And as you ponder what it truly meant to be divine in a desert kingdom, keep your eyes peeled for the next chapter of this extraordinary saga, because in ancient Egypt, the journey is as captivating as the destination. As the afternoon sun casts its golden glow across the Egyptian landscape, you might start to feel philosophical, or perhaps just delirious from the heat. Either way, it's the perfect time to dive into the spiritual life of ancient Egyptians, who had more gods than a modern smartphone has apps. And trust me, their pantheon was a complex web of divine drama, familial feuds, and celestial soap operas. Let's start with the basics. The Egyptians worshipped an eye-watering number of deities, each with their own specific roles and responsibilities. Amun-Ra was the big boss, the sun god who ruled over all, while Osiris handled the afterlife. Anubis was the goddess for mummification, and Hathor took care of love and music. In a world where life was as unpredictable as the Nile's floods, having a god for every occasion was a smart move. You never knew when you'd need to appease the deity of fertility to ensure a bountiful harvest, or pray for protection from the whims of the desert. Speaking of the afterlife, let's bust some myths about mummification. While Hollywood would have you believe that every Egyptian had a sarcophagus waiting for their eternal slumber, the reality was a bit more exclusive. Mummification was primarily reserved for the elite, those who could afford to spend the equivalent of a year's salary on the elaborate process. We're talking about a method that involved removing the brain through the nose and preserving organs in canopic jars. It's not exactly what you'd call a DIY project. This brings us to the tantalizing concept of the afterlife, which wasn't just an eternal snooze fest. The Egyptians believed in a place called the Field of Reeds, a paradise where the soul could enjoy an idealized version of earthly life. But first, you had to pass the ultimate test, the weighing of the heart. Your heart was weighed against the feather of Mad, representing truth and justice. If your heart was lighter, you were good to go. If not, it was chow time for Amit, the soul-devouring beast with the head of a crocodile, the front of a lion, and the back of a hippo. Talk about a creature with an identity crisis. This obsession with the afterlife wasn't just spiritual. It was a driving force in daily life. Tombs were stocked like ancient supermarkets, filled with food, tools, and treasures to ensure a comfortable afterlife. And let's not forget the tomb art, which was as much about aesthetics as it was about functionality. These vivid scenes were believed to come to life in the afterlife, serving as a cosmic insurance policy for the soul. But religion wasn't just about the afterlife. It permeated every aspect of society. Temples were the epicenters of both spiritual and economic life. They weren't just places of worship, but also hubs of commerce, education, and even healthcare. The priests who ran these temples wielded significant power, managing vast estates and acting as intermediaries between the people and the gods. In a society where divine favor was seen as critical to success, the priests were the ultimate power brokers. Now, let's talk about those jaw-dropping cultural achievements that still leave modern engineers scratching their heads. Take the pyramids, for example. These colossal structures weren't just tombs. They were feats of engineering genius. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu around 2580-2560 BCE, consists of about 3 million blocks, each weighing between 2, 5, and 15 tons. And here's the kicker. The blocks were so precisely cut and placed that even today, you can't slip a piece of paper between them. Modern construction crews, with all their technology, would still struggle to replicate such precision. And it wasn't just the pyramids that showcased Egyptian ingenuity. The temples, like Karnak and Luxor, were architectural masterpieces, with towering columns and intricate carvings that told stories of gods and pharaohs. These structures were designed to inspire awe and reinforce the divine authority of the rulers who commissioned them. The art inside was just as impressive, with vivid colors and detailed scenes that captured the essence of Egyptian life. And here's a fun fact. The Egyptians used a pigment called Egyptian blue, made from copper silicate, which was one of the first synthetic pigments and a testament to their innovative spirit. Art and architecture weren't just about aesthetics. They were tools of propaganda, reinforcing the social and political order. The pharaohs used monumental architecture to project power and divine right, ensuring their legacy would be etched in stone for millennia. But while these grand projects captured the imagination, they also drained resources and manpower, often at great cost to the common folk. Yet despite the grandeur of their creations, the Egyptians were pragmatists at heart. They understood the importance of balance in life and in the cosmos. Mad, the concept of harmony and order, was at the center of their worldview. It dictated everything from how they governed to how they farmed, ensuring that chaos was kept at bay in a world that seemed constantly on the brink of it. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the desert, it's clear that ancient Egypt was a land of contrasts, a place where gods walked among men, where the mundane and the mystical coexisted, and where the pursuit of balance shaped a civilization that continues to fascinate us today. The story isn't over yet, so stick around as we delve deeper into the mysteries of this remarkable culture. After all, in the land of the pharaohs, there's always more than meets the eye. As the sun dips below the horizon and paints the sky with shades of orange and purple, you might be tempted to wax poetic about the enchanting beauty of the ancient Egyptian landscape. But before you get too lost in a sunset reverie, remember that if you had made it through a single day in this desert landscape, you'd have earned your stripes. Surviving here wasn't just an exercise in historical cosplay. It was an endurance test that would put modern survivalists to shame. Let's start with the fundamentals. Resourcefulness was the Egyptian trump card. In a land where the Nile was both friend and foe, the ability to adapt was key. The river's annual flood might have been a life-giving force, but it was also a fickle one. Too much water, and you were looking at destruction. Too little, and famine loomed large. The Egyptians developed one of the earliest irrigation systems to manage this delicate balance, channeling water through a network of canals and basins. This wasn't just clever engineering, it was a necessity. Without it, the fields would have shriveled up faster than yesterday's grapes left in the sun. Now, let's talk about their knack for innovation. The Egyptians were the original Mac-jivers of the ancient world. They invented everything from the shadaf, a sort of ancient crane for lifting water, to papyrus, the precursor to modern paper. Imagine running an entire civilization on scrolls of papyrus. It's like trying to run a business using only post-it notes. Yet, despite the seeming fragility of their materials, Egyptian records have withstood the test of time, giving us invaluable insights into their daily lives. Speaking of time, the Egyptians were obsessed with it. They invented the 365-day calendar, dividing the year into 3 seasons based on the Nile's flood cycle: Akhit, flooding; Peret, growing; and Shemu, harvest. Each had 4 months of 30 days, with an extra 5 days tacked on at the end to keep things in sync. These extra days were spent honoring the gods, which is a nicer way of saying they partied to mark another year of survival. So next time you're groaning about leap year, remember that the Egyptians had it all figured out millennia ago. While we're on the subject of innovation, let's not forget their architectural prowess. The pyramids might get all the headlines, but the temples and obelisks were just as spectacular. These weren't just stone piles. They were meticulously aligned with the stars, serving both as religious symbols and astronomical tools. The Egyptians' understanding of the cosmos was so advanced that they could predict celestial events with remarkable accuracy. They didn't have telescopes, but they had the next best thing: a sky full of gods that demanded attention. But here's where we need to bust some myths. Ancient Egypt wasn't all gold and glamour. Sure, the pharaohs lived in splendor, but the average Egyptian's life was a constant hustle. Forget about lounging in the shade with a goblet of wine. You were more likely to be toiling in the fields or working on monumental construction projects under the blazing sun. It was a society built on the backs of those who endured, their contributions etched into history not by name, but by the lasting impact of their labor. Take the economy, for instance. It was a complex web of trade and barter, driven by agriculture and bolstered by trade routes stretching as far as Mesopotamia and Crete. Grain was the currency of choice, not because it was convenient, but because it was essential. It fed the population, paid the workers, and filled the coffers of the state. The pharaohs might have been the guard kings, but it was the grain that kept the machine running. And while the romantic notion of trading spices and gold might sound appealing, the reality was more akin to a logistical nightmare, with caravans traversing treacherous paths to bring goods to and from the Nile. Now, let's consider the social fabric of ancient Egypt. The society was a rigid hierarchy, with the pharaoh at the top, followed by nobles, priests, and scribes. Below them were the artisans and merchants, and at the very bottom, the farmers and laborers. Social mobility was almost non-existent. Your station was largely determined at birth. But here's the kicker. Despite this rigid structure, there was a sense of order and purpose. Each person played a role in maintaining Mad, the cosmic balance, which was as essential to the Egyptians as the air they breathed. As the stars begin to twinkle in the sky, it's time to reflect on the allure and adversity of this ancient civilization. It's easy to romanticize the grandeur of the pyramids and the mystique of the pharaohs, but the reality was far from luxurious. Surviving even a single day here required tenacity, ingenuity, and a bit of divine favor. Yet, despite the harsh realities, the Egyptians left an indelible mark on history. Their achievements in agriculture, engineering, and astronomy laid the groundwork for future civilizations, influencing everything from the Roman calendar to modern irrigation techniques. In the end, the romance of ancient Egypt endures because it was a civilization that dared to dream big. They reached for the stars, both literally and figuratively, and their legacy is a testament to human resilience and innovation. So, as you close your eyes and drift off to sleep, remember that the magic of Egypt isn't just in its monumental achievements, but in the everyday lives of those who lived and thrived in a land where the desert and the divine danced an eternal tango. The sun's barely peeking over the horizon, but your day in the medieval coal mining village begins. And when I say the day begins early, we're talking roosters crow early. Welcome to the world where alarm clock means the neighbor's barnyard symphony. You're in a village so small, the concept of privacy is a foreign language. Your house is a cozy, if not claustrophobic, one-room shack shared with a family of at least 6, aroma of last night's stew still lingering like a questionable perfume. If you're lucky, you've got a straw bed that's slightly less lumpy than the floor. But hey, who needs personal space when you have community, right? Coal is king here, and not just because it's what keeps the medieval equivalent of central heating going. This is the 13th century, and you're smack in the middle of the industrial lifeline of England. Coal isn't just a black rock, it's the lifeblood of blacksmiths, powering forges that produce everything from horseshoes to armor. So, whether you're fending off the cold or forging weapons, coal's got you covered. It's the medieval version of oil today, indispensable and just as messy to extract. But let's not romanticize this. The demand for coal is skyrocketing, partly because everyone's finally realized that burning wood in a fireplace is about as efficient as using a candle to light a football stadium. And with this demand comes pressure, economic pressure that's as heavy as the sacks of coal you'll be lugging around. Every family in the village is somehow tied to mining, whether it's directly swinging a pick or indirectly through supporting roles. You either dig or you don't eat, simple as that. Now, you might be thinking, why not just move to another job? Here's the kicker. Social mobility in medieval England is about as feasible as a unicorn sighting. You're pretty much stuck in the social class you were born into, unless you strike it rich. And let's face it, the odds are not in your favor. A miner's wages are meager. Think a few pence a day if you're lucky. And that's if you survive the day without a cave-in, or, black lung. Speaking of social hierarchy, let's take a closer look at how this little village operates. At the top, you've got the landowners and mine operators. They're the ones who make the real money, sitting in their slightly larger shacks with maybe even a second room. Then there's you, the miner, at the bottom rung of the ladder. You work long, grueling hours for pittance. But hey, at least you're not a serf tied to the land. Small victories, right? There's a certain camaraderie among your fellow miners, a brotherhood forged in the soot and sweat of the mines. But there's also a palpable tension, a sense of desperation, as everyone competes for the best seams of coal. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and you're all just trying to keep your heads above the coal dust. The village might be small, but the stakes are enormous. With coal at the center of this microeconomy, you're not just mining a rock, you're mining your family's future. The impact of coal extends beyond just your village. It's part of a larger shift, a burgeoning economy that's moving away from agriculture to industry. The change is slow, almost imperceptible, but it's there, like the quiet hum of a distant engine. England is on the cusp of something big, and while you might not see it in your lifetime, you're a tiny cog in the machine that's paving the way for industrial revolution. Yet, in the midst of this economic pressure and social stagnation, there's a unique resilience. It's in the way families band together, pooling resources and labor to survive another day. It's in the songs sung by miners as they work, mix of hope and defiance echoing through the dark tunnels. And it's in the silent determination etched on every soot-streaked face as they emerge from the mines at day's end. So, as you lace up your boots, ready to face the long hours ahead, remember this. Life in a medieval mining village isn't for the faint of heart. It's a tough, gritty existence. But it's also a testament to human endurance, a story of survival against the odds. And as you shuffle out into the pre-dawn gloom, you can almost hear the whispers of history, reminding you that while you might not last a day, they did, and their legacy is carved into the very bedrock of society. As you step into the mine, the first thing that hits you, besides the damp, claustrophobic air, is the realization that medieval coal mining is as much a test of will as it is a test of strength. The tools of the trade are rudimentary at best, like something out of a caveman's garage sale. Your hands grip a pickaxe that feels more like a glorified sharpened stick than a precision instrument. And let's not forget the shovel, which is basically a flat piece of metal attached to a wooden handle, about as ergonomic as a brick. But these tools are your lifeline. They're what stand between you and starvation. You wield them with the kind of fervor usually reserved for religious zealots. Every swing of the pickaxe sends echoes through the narrow tunnels, a rhythm of labor that's both primal and monotonous. Your muscles scream in protest, reminding you that medieval fitness routines are less cross-fit and more, can you lift your own body weight in coal? Spoiler alert, you have to. The workday spans from sunup to sundown, roughly 12 to 14 hours of back-breaking labor. No 8-hour shifts here, folks. Forget weekends, Toe, or coffee breaks. Your only respite is when you can no longer distinguish your sweat from the coal dust coating your skin. It's a grueling marathon, not a sprint, and endurance is the name of the game. Now, safety standards. Those are as mythical as dragons. Nice to think about, but they don't exist. Helmets. Ha! The concept of head protection is as foreign as sushi in a medieval banquet. You work in your everyday clothes, which, let's face it, are barely suitable for a stroll down the village lane, much less a subterranean excavation. Your entire wardrobe could fit into a modern-day carry-on, and you'd still have room for souvenirs. The risk of accidents is staggering, a grim reality of the job. Cave-ins are a constant threat, lurking like a bad plot twist in a horror movie. And if that doesn't get you, there's always the risk of gas explosions, collapses, or the ever-popular black lung. Statistics from the period are about as reliable as medieval medicine, but historical accounts suggest that injuries and fatalities were common enough to make you wonder if there was a secret miner's handshake that just involved crossing yourself for luck. To put this in perspective, consider that in today's world, mining accidents have decreased dramatically, thanks to modern technology and safety protocols. In 2021, the fatality rate for miners in developed countries was less than 0.02 per 100,000 workers. Now, compare that to medieval times, where your odds of a happy retirement were about the same as winning the lottery today. It's a testament to human grit that anyone survived long enough to pass on their genes. As you chip away at the coal face, you become acutely aware of the economic forces at play. The demand for coal is insatiable, driven by the burgeoning medieval economy. It's the fuel that powers everything from blacksmiths' forges to domestic hearths, and its extraction is a necessary evil. The mine owners profit handsomely, of course, while you, the humble laborer, earn a few pence a day, barely enough to keep your family fed and clothed. Yet there's a certain romance to the grit and grime, isn't there? The idea of toiling away in the depths of the earth, emerging with sooty face and aching muscles, is the stuff of legends. But let's not kid ourselves. It's a brutal existence, more akin to a survival reality show than a fairy tale. And while the notion of the noble miner is appealing, the reality is a daily grind that tests the limits of human endurance. So, as you drag your exhausted body out of the mine at day's end, with the sun dipping below the horizon, you can't help but marvel at the sheer resilience of those who came before us. They faced the darkness with a determination that's both inspiring and humbling. And as you head home, the weight of the day heavy on your shoulders, you know that tomorrow you'll do it all over again. Because in this medieval world, survival isn't just a choice, it's a necessity. As you trudge home, the day's labor clinging to you like a shadow, there's no denying the toll this work takes. Your body is a battlefield, each muscle an aching testament to the coal mine's relentless demands. Medieval mining isn't just a job, it's an endurance test where your reward is another day of survival. Let's not sugarcoat it. The midday heat in the mines is its own form of medieval torture. Imagine working in a sauna filled with coal dust, where the air is so thick you could cut it with a knife, or at least try, if you could see your hand in front of your face. The physical exertion required to haul coal to the surface could give any modern-day gym rat a run for their money. Forget about counting reps. You're counting breaths between hauling 100-pound sacks or pushing carts that make modern wheelbarrows look like luxury vehicles. And if you think you can catch a breather, think again. The mine is a living beast, shifting and groaning under the weight of its own creation, threatening to collapse at any moment. Ventilation is a joke, an inside joke perhaps among the mine owners. The air is stagnant, a cocktail of dust and toxic gases that make every breath feel like swallowing sandpaper. Miners had to get creative with ventilation, resorting to methods that were more hopeful than effective. Picture this, a makeshift fan, crafted from whatever scraps could be found, waved by hand in a desperate attempt to circulate air. It's not exactly a Dyson, but it's all they had. And then there's the constant threat of cave-ins, the mine's not-so-subtle way of reminding you who's really in charge. The timber supports are more decorative than functional, about as sturdy as a straw house in a wolf-infested forest. Miners, aware of these ever-present dangers, developed a sort of sixth sense, an ability to hear the mind's whispers of impending doom. They would listen for the telltale signs, a shift in the earth, a crack in the rock, anything that might signal it was time to get out of Dodge. Of course, even with these primitive early warning systems, accidents were as common as fleas on a dog. When a cave-in did occur, the response was about as organized as a medieval flash mob. Rescue efforts were largely dependent on who was around and whether they had the strength left to dig out their comrades. It wasn't just a physical challenge. It was a race against time, with lives hanging in the balance. And if you did get injured, well, welcome to medieval medicine, where treatments were often as dangerous as the injuries themselves. A deep cut might be stitched up with whatever thread was available, infections treated with poultices made from herbs that were more guesswork than science. Broken bones, a wooden splint, and a prayer. If you were really lucky, there might be a bone setter in the village, a person with no formal training, but a knack for snapping things back into place. It's a miracle anyone survived. In the absence of doctors, the village might have a healer or wise woman, someone who relied on traditional remedies passed down through generations. They brew concoctions from whatever plants they could forage, their potions a mix of superstition and herbal lore. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't, but in a world without antibiotics, any cure was better than none. Economic pressures didn't just affect the miners. They also dictated the speed and efficiency of these rescue efforts. Time is money, and in the medieval economy, coal was as good as gold. The mine owners, sitting in their slightly larger cottages, had little interest in shutting down operations for a rescue mission unless absolutely necessary. The harsh reality was that miners were replaceable, coal seams were not. Yet, amidst all this, there's a certain rugged romanticism to the life of a miner. The camaraderie among workers, the shared hardship, and the dark humor that lightened the burden of their daily grind. These men were the backbone of an economy in transition, their toil fueling the fires of progress. They were unsung heroes, their sacrifices laying the foundation for the industrial advances that would follow. But let's not kid ourselves. The idea of the noble miner is more myth than reality. It's a story we tell ourselves to make sense of the past, to find meaning in the suffering. The truth is, most miners didn't have the luxury of pondering their place in history. They were too busy trying to stay alive. Their legacy isn't one of glory, but of grit, a testament to human endurance in the face of unimaginable odds. As you lay down at night, still tasting the coal dust on your lips, you can't help but marvel at the resilience of those who went before us. They lived and died by the rhythm of the mine, their lives intertwined with the very earth they labored beneath. And while you might not last a day in their shoes, their story is a reminder of the strength of the human spirit, a history carved into the bedrock of civilization. As you lay down at night, still tasting the coal dust on your lips, you can't help but marvel at the resilience of those who went before us. They lived and died by the rhythm of the mine, their lives intertwined with the very earth they labored beneath. And while you might not last a day in their shoes, their story is a reminder of the strength of the human spirit, a history carved into the bedrock of civilization. But as the day winds down, and the mine's echo fades into the night, the village transforms into a different kind of hive. It's not just about survival anymore. It's about community, that sticky social glue binding everyone together like the medieval version of duct tape. Here, in the dim glow of hearth fires, a different kind of economy emerges, one of shared support and resilience. Let's get one thing straight. Communal living in a medieval mining village is not some bucolic fairy tale. It's more like the world's most intense episode of Survivor, where alliances are crucial and resources scarcer than a Wi-Fi signal in the middle of nowhere. Families pool their meager earnings, sharing everything from food to firewood. It's a barter system on steroids, where a couple of eggs might get you a loaf of bread, or a favor today might mean a debt repaid tomorrow. Picture a village dinner, a potluck of medieval proportions, where everyone contributes what little they have. The collective stew pot becomes a symbol of unity, bubbling with whatever scraps can be spared. It's a culinary adventure, to say the least, rabbit, wild herbs, and the occasional suspicious root. If you're lucky, someone's managed to catch a fish or barter for a bit of salt pork. It's not much, but it's shared, and that's what counts. But it's not all grim faces and grimier hands. This is where the cultural heart of the village beats strongest. After a day of back-breaking labor, storytelling becomes the Netflix of the medieval world. Gathered around the fire, families share tales that are as much about entertainment as they are about preserving history. The stories are rich with local legends, heroes who may or may not have existed, and cautionary tales that double as moral lessons. Think of it as a mix between folklore and life advice, delivered with a side of gallows humor. Songs, too, are an integral part of this communal fabric. They're the Spotify playlists of the 13th century, passed from one generation to the next. The miners' songs echo through the night, a mix of lament and defiance, each note a testament to their endurance. These weren't just tunes to pass the time. They were a form of resistance, a way to keep spirits high when the weight of the world felt particularly heavy. Some songs spoke of love and loss, others of heroic deeds and mythical creatures. It's the kind of cultural tapestry that's rich in color, even if the threads are a bit frayed. Now, let's debunk a popular myth, the idea that medieval camaraderie was all sunshine and camaraderie. While the romantic notion of brotherhood and unity is appealing, the truth is a bit more complex. Sure, there were strong bonds forged in the mines, but competition was fierce. With limited resources and high stakes, not everyone played nice. Rivalries could simmer beneath the surface, ready to boil over at any moment. It's the kind of tension that could make a soap opera look tame. But necessity is the mother of invention, and in this case, it's also the mother of cooperation. Families learned early on that survival meant sticking together, despite differences or disputes. It's a harsh reality. You might not like your neighbor, but you darn well better get along, because you might need to borrow his ox come ploughing season. And so, like it or not, you learn to live and let live, perhaps the most enduring lesson of all. In this tightly knit community, everyone has a role to play. Children from a young age are expected to contribute, whether it's fetching water or tending to the livestock. Elderly villagers, though no longer able to work the mines, become the keepers of knowledge, passing down skills and stories. It's a cycle of life that's as efficient as it is relentless, ensuring that the village, if not each individual, survives to see another day. The cultural impact of mining extends far beyond the village, reaching into the very fabric of medieval society. Mining communities became hubs of innovation, where necessity drove invention. The tools, the techniques, even the songs and stories, all of these elements contributed to a broader cultural exchange. Miners traveled, bringing their skills and stories with them, spreading ideas like seeds in the wind. In a way, they were the original influencers, shaping the world in ways both visible and unseen. And let's not forget the women of the village, often overlooked in historical accounts, but pivotal to the community's survival. While men toiled underground, women managed the home, the finances, and often the politics of daily life. They were the unseen architects of stability, ensuring that the village ran smoothly even when the men were deep in the earth. In an era where gender roles were rigid, these women were quietly subverting expectations, proving that strength comes in many forms. So, as the fire dies down and the village settles into the rhythm of sleep, take a moment to consider the tapestry of life in a medieval mining community. It's a patchwork of grit and grace, where survival isn't just a matter of individual endurance, but collective resilience. It's a story of human connection, of bonds forged in hardship and tempered by time. And while you might not last a day in their shoes, you can certainly admire the path they've walked. But don't get too comfortable. There's more to explore, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover as we delve deeper into the world of medieval mining. So, stay tuned, because the next chapter promises to be as riveting as the last, with new insights and revelations just waiting to be unearthed. As the embers of our medieval mining village story glow faintly, let's step back for a panoramic view of the long-term impact of coal mining on medieval society. Coal wasn't just a dirty rock to be hacked from the earth. It was the catalyst that turned the wheels of change. Picture this. By the late 13th century, England was consuming over 200,000 tons of coal annually, a statistic that would make medieval eyebrows shoot up faster than you can say industrial revolution. Coal was a game changer, transforming local economies and laying the groundwork for the technological leaps that turned plowshares into the pistons of progress. The economic ripples from coal mining extended far beyond the village. While your average miner was lucky to rake in a few pence a day, the mine owners were laughing all the way to their slightly larger homes. They were the early adopters of capitalism, playing a proto-version of the game Monopoly, where the board was the English countryside and the pieces were blackened nuggets of coal. These tycoons didn't just influence the local economy, they shaped regional markets, turning humble villages into bustling centers of trade. The demand for coal fueled advancements in transportation, with roads and rivers becoming the medieval highways that connected distant markets. Coal's importance in medieval society wasn't just economic, it was societal too. It quietly undermined the feudal system, where land was king and serfs were its loyal subjects. As coal mining grew, it offered a glimmer of independence for those willing to delve into the earth's depths. It was a slow erosion of the rigid social structure, a small crack in the monolithic wall of feudalism that would eventually crumble into the diverse economic landscape of the modern age. But let's not get carried away with romantic notions of social mobility. For most miners, the only thing that rose faster than coal dust was the cost of living. The environmental repercussions of medieval coal mining are a reminder that every silver lining has a cloud, or in this case, a coal-blackened sky. Forests were cleared to fuel the insatiable demand for charcoal, leading to deforestation that would make modern environmentalists weep. The air quality. Let's just say medieval England wasn't exactly a breath of fresh air, with soot and smoke darkening the skies in a grim foreshadowing of the Industrial Revolution's notorious smog. Waterways weren't spared either. Streams ran black with coal sludge, a toxic cocktail that would have given medieval salmon pause. It's a stark reminder that even in the past, progress came at a price, and the environment often footed the bill. Yet, despite these drawbacks, the coal industry was a harbinger of innovation, nudging society towards a future where steam engines would replace horse-drawn carts, and factories would rise like steel fortresses on the horizon. By the 18th century, coal was not just an energy source, it was the beating heart of the Industrial Revolution. The humble miner of the 13th century, swinging his crude pickaxe, was unknowingly laying the foundation for a world that would one day be driven by the power of steam and steel. It's a legacy that's as monumental as it is humbling. Now, let's bring this historical roller coaster to its final stop with a humorous yet poignant reminder of why you probably wouldn't survive a day in a medieval coal mine. Imagine trading your ergonomic desk chair for a rough-hewn bench, or worse, a rock, after a 14-hour shift in a mine that makes a sauna feel like a cool breeze. There's no Wi-Fi to distract you, only the constant buzz of survival humming in your ears. The only streaming service you have is the trickle of water down the mine's walls, and your playlist, a symphony of groans and the rhythmic clang of pickaxes echoing through the tunnels. Your modern comforts, central heating, electric lights, not getting crushed under tons of rock, are luxuries our medieval counterparts couldn't even dream of. They didn't have the option to binge-watch their favorite shows after a long day. Their entertainment was survival. And let's not forget the culinary delights of the medieval miner's diet, a never-ending feast of hard bread and questionable stew, seasoned with the finest coal dust. Your taste buds might revolt, but those miners, they were just grateful for something to fill their stomachs. So, as you sit back in your climate-controlled room, surrounded by the conveniences of the 21st century, take a moment to tip your hat to the miners of the past. Their grit and determination carved out more than just coal. They carved out the path to modernity. And while you might not last a day in their soot-stained shoes, their legacy is a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity. It's a story etched into the annals of history, a reminder that every comfort we enjoy today is built on the backs of those who labored in the dark. So, next time you flip a light switch or turn up the heat, remember the medieval miners who worked, so you could live in the light. You crack open your eyes to a new day in the medieval village of, say, somewhere in rural England, circa 1347. The morning light, just as relentless as ever, pushes through the cracks in your wooden shutters. Your ears pick up the usual village symphony, the rooster's crow, the blacksmith's hammer, and the distant chatter of folks starting their day. It's all pretty standard, except for a little twist. Today's special guest is the Black Death. Yes, infamous headliner that's about to crash your medieval party without so much as an RSVP. Let's talk symptoms, because inquiring minds and bodies want to know. You might notice a swell in your groin or armpit, something the size of an egg, and not the kind you want to poach. This, my friend, is a bubo, and it's about to become the unwanted mascot of your village. Nausea, fever, chills, and an overall feeling that you've danced too hard at yesterday's feast. Check, check, and check. And if your skin's taking on a purplish hue, congratulations, you're now the proud owner of the Black Death signature look. The villagers, bless their hearts, have some colorful theories about what's causing this death parade. A popular one is miasma theory, which blames bad air for the malady. Folks are convinced that the very atmosphere is out to get them, so they're burning incense and herbs like it's a medieval Coachella. But let's be real. The actual culprits are tiny, flea-ridden rodents. Picture this. Rats strutting through your streets like they own the place, each one a little Trojan horse carrying deadly bacteria. And here you are, blissfully unaware, sniffing the lavender sachet you tucked into your shirt. Life in 1347 is a bit like a medieval soap opera, minus the soap, because cleanliness isn't really trending yet. You're living cheek by jowl with your neighbors, in houses made of wattle and daub, which is basically mud and straw. It's cozy, but not exactly what you'd call a germ-free environment. The village is bustling with around 200 souls, all of whom have a vested interest in not dropping like flies. In terms of sanitation, let's just say the medieval hygiene game isn't winning any awards. Your village might have a communal latrine, but that's more of a suggestion than a rule. Personal boundaries are as non-existent as indoor plumbing, which makes the spread of disease as easy as pie. But hey, at least you're not alone in this cramped reality. You've got your cows, chickens, and pigs practically living in your living room, because why not? As you shuffle out into the street, you notice the market square is buzzing with more than just the flies. People are whispering, casting nervous glances at anyone who so much as sneezes. It's like a medieval game of who's got the plague. And trust me, you don't want to win. The local apothecary is doing brisk business, selling everything from crushed emeralds to the dried droppings of whatever bird was handy. None of it's effective, but it's the thought that counts, right? Now, let's debunk some myths while we're at it. Many people think the plague is some kind of divine punishment. Maybe it's for excessive sinning, or perhaps God's just having a bad year. Either way, the clergy are cashing in on this narrative, encouraging everyone to repent while passing the donation plate. But here's the kicker. The real divine intervention isn't happening in the sky. It's happening on the backs of those aforementioned rats. As you navigate through your day, the tension in the village is palpable. Families are barricading themselves inside, hoping a thick door will keep the plague at bay. Others are packing up and leaving, convinced that the next village over has better vibes, or at least fewer buboes. But little do they know, the plague is playing the long game, making house calls across Europe with an efficiency that would make any postal service envious. You find yourself wondering how long this grim guest will stick around. Spoiler alert, the Black Death will hang out for a few years, killing about a third of Europe's population. That's roughly 25 million people, give or take a night or two. It's a numbers game, and not the kind you want to be part of. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, you notice a group of villagers gathered around the local well, their faces masks of dread. Word is, someone from the village nearby has succumbed to the plague. This news spreads faster than the disease itself, fanning the flames of fear. You can't help but feel the same creeping dread. The plague doesn't care if you're a farmer or a noble. It's an equal opportunity destroyer, indifferent to status or wealth. And here's a fun fact. Contrary to popular belief, medieval villages weren't isolated little hamlets cut off from the rest of the world. Trade routes crisscrossed the continent like veins, carrying the lifeblood of commerce, and unfortunately, disease. Ships arriving from the east with a perfect delivery system for the plague, stowing away in the cargo holds like unwanted souvenirs. The bustling ports of Genoa, Venice, and Marseille became unwitting epicenters, distributing the plague with the same zeal as a medieval Amazon prime. As you wander back to your abode, you can't shake the feeling that your village is a tinderbox, waiting for the spark. The spectre of the Black Death looms large, casting a shadow over every interaction. A simple cough is enough to clear a room, and the once vibrant community is now a mosaic of suspicion and fear. And yet, life goes on. The fields still need tending, the livestock fed. The rhythms of daily life persist, even as the threat of the plague hangs heavy in the air. As you lay down to rest at the end of the day, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow will bring. Will it be another day of survival, or will the plague finally come knocking at your door? As night falls, you're left with the uneasy knowledge that in this game of medieval roulette, the odds are not in your favor. But for now, you close your eyes, hoping that sleep will offer a temporary escape from the grim reality that awaits at dawn. Tomorrow is another day, and in the 14th century, that's no small accomplishment. As your weary eyes finally close, you can't help but wonder if tomorrow will bring another day of survival, or if the spectre of the Black Death will come knocking. But alas, tomorrow is a gift you've yet to unwrap, and in this medieval Game of Thrones, waking up is half the battle won. Now, let's shift gears from the doom and gloom of mortality to the equally riveting tale of medieval economics. The plague, for all its death-dealing prowess, was also a seismic disruptor. Picture this. Europe's labor force is getting decimated faster than you can say bubonic. With mortality rates soaring, sometimes snatching up 50% of the population in certain regions, the survivors suddenly found themselves in a seller's market. Those left standing could command wages previously unthinkable. It's like getting a promotion, but with a side of existential dread. Enter the Statute of Laborers of 1351, a royal attempt to cap wages at pre-plague levels. King Edward Roman III, in a move that's as much about maintaining the social order as it is about economics, decreed that peasants should not demand higher wages. Nice try, Eddie, but enforcing this was like trying to herd cats. Imagine the king's frustration as peasants, emboldened by their newfound leverage, simply packed up and moved to where the grass and the pay were greener. The ripple effects of labor shortages were like a medieval butterfly effect. Agricultural production took a nosedive because, surprise, dead peasants don't plow fields. This scarcity drove up the price of grain and other staples, which only added to the general misery. You might think landlords would be thrilled to finally have a bit of power over their tenants, but when half your workforce is 6 feet under, it's hard to feel smug. But let's not forget those medieval entrepreneurs, the folks with a knack for seeing opportunity in chaos. Some enterprising souls turned to sheep farming, a less labor-intensive endeavor compared to traditional crops. Wool became the new gold, and England was about to become the Gucci of the medieval world. Higher demand and less manpower meant those who could still produce had the market by the woolly horns. This economic shift wasn't just about money, it was a social earthquake. Serfs, who'd been tethered to the land like a medieval ball and chain, found themselves with bargaining power they'd only dreamed of. If their lord was a jerk, they could simply up sticks and find a better deal elsewhere. It's like the original gig economy, minus the apps and Silicon Valley hype. Here's a fun twist. While the lower classes were climbing the social ladder, the noble elite were having a bit of an identity crisis. As the old feudal bonds began to fray, the aristocracy found their traditional power waning. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it killed the old social order. You could say the plague was the great equalizer, leveling the playing fields faster than a knight could say chivalry. Meanwhile, in the cities, merchants were hustling harder than ever. With trade routes disrupted and demand for goods skyrocketing, those with a nose for commerce were making bank. New fortunes were forged in the crucible of crisis, and the merchant class was rising like a phoenix from the ashes of the old feudal system. The urban centers were becoming hives of economic activity, and the seeds of capitalism were being sown amid the chaos. Let's not romanticize this upheaval too much, though. The medieval myth of the kindly lord and loyal peasants sharing a bucolic existence was more fairy tale than fact. The reality, a harsh system where power dynamics were as fluid as they were brutal. The Black Death didn't create equality. It simply shuffled the deck in a game that was never fair to begin with. And while everyone was busy trying to survive, the church was having a field day. Some clergy, convinced the plague was divine punishment, doubled down on sermons about sin and salvation. More cynical churchmen, however, saw the turmoil as a chance to fill the coffers. With death now a regular guest at the medieval dinner table, indulgences, those nifty get-out-of-purgatory cards, were selling like hotcakes. Talk about divine irony. But back to our beleaguered peasants, who were writing the first chapters of a new economic narrative. As labor became scarce, they discovered the power of negotiation. If a lord refused to pay better wages, workers simply moved on, leaving empty fields in their wake. This newfound mobility was a game changer. It chipped away at the rigid class structures that had dominated for centuries. In this reshuffled world, community ties were both strengthened and strained. Villages that once thrived as tightly knit units now saw families fractured by loss and migration. Neighboring towns were no longer just a short journey away. They became lifelines or lifeboats, depending on your perspective. And as these communities evolved, so too did the economic landscape. The plague's legacy was not just death and despair, but also reinvention and resilience. As the sun sets on another plague-riddled day, you ponder the strange alchemy of crisis and opportunity. In this medieval world, the future is as uncertain as ever. Yet in the rubble of the old order, new possibilities are beginning to take root. The Black Death, it turns out, was the catalyst for change, albeit a grim and uninvited one. And as you drift into a restless sleep, the echoes of a world in flux whisper through your dreams. Tomorrow may bring more of the same, or perhaps a new dawn entirely. But for now you rest, knowing that in the grand tapestry of history, every thread, every life, every death, every bargain struck in a bustling market is woven into the fabric of what is yet to come. In the swirling mix of upheaval and uncertainty, you might think medieval medicine would be a beacon of hope. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. If you needed medical help, you'd likely find yourself at the mercy of someone who believed the stars, not germs, were throwing you under the bus. Welcome to the world of medieval medicine, where your fate might just be written in the stars, or in a humoral chart. Let's dive into the medieval medical playbook. The main strategy, a healthy dose of astrology. Yes, the alignment of planets was your go-to diagnostic tool. Feeling under the weather, your local physician might consult the stars before even glancing in your direction. They'd whip out an astrological chart, squint at the heavens, and declare that Venus was in retrograde or Mars was throwing shade. And you thought your horoscope was just for fun. But wait, there's more. Enter the humoral theory, a concept so enduring it stuck around for centuries. This theory posited that your body was governed by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Balance these bad boys and you were golden. Fall out of balance and you'd find yourself in a world of hurt. Got a fever. Clearly your body had too much blood. Solution: bloodletting. You'd be bled dry by a barber wielding a razor-sharp blade, hoping to restore balance. It's like a medieval version of more cowbell, but with more leeches. Speaking of which, leeches were the medieval multitaskers of medicine. Need to drain some blood? Leeches. Got a weird rash? Leeches. Bad day at the market? You guessed it, leeches. They were the Swiss Army knife of treatments, though not exactly the warm, fuzzy kind you'd want hanging around. Now, let's talk about the rock stars of medieval medicine, the infamous plague doctors. These guys were the original PPE pioneers, strutting around in long robes, gloves, and those iconic bird-like masks. The masks with their long beaks were stuffed with aromatic herbs, which doctors believed would protect them from the miasma or bad air they thought caused the plague. Fun fact, they looked like a cross between a carnival act and a horror movie villain. The irony, these masks did provide some protection, just not in the way they intended. They kept the fleas, the real culprits, at bay. Accidental science for the win. These plague doctors were often not doctors at all. Many were second-rate physicians or even amateur healers looking for a gig. Their medical credentials, questionable at best. But who needs credentials when you've got a killer wardrobe and a penchant for burning incense? They'd roam from town to town, attempting to treat the afflicted. Their methods, a mixed bag of medieval medicine and superstition. Think potions made from crushed gems, and poultices of anything remotely pungent. Next, let's address the elephant in the room, the belief that the Black Death was a punishment from the heavens. Many genuinely thought they could pray the plague away. Enter flagellants, groups of people who wandered the countryside, whipping themselves in a bid for divine mercy. Their rationale: self-inflicted pain might just appease the wrathful deity they believed was behind the whole debacle. It's like trying to negotiate with a hurricane using an umbrella. But let's not paint medieval medicine as entirely useless. Occasionally, they stumbled upon something that actually made sense. Take quarantine, for example. The Venetians, savvy traders and early adopters of social distancing, began isolating ships for 40 days, a practice they called quarantino. It was a lucky stroke of genius that slowed the spread of the plague, even if they didn't understand why it worked. For all its quirks, medieval medicine had a few bright spots. Herbal remedies, for instance, went entirely off the mark. Some herbs had legitimate antibacterial properties, though though medieval folks had no clue why or how they worked. They just knew that sometimes they did. As the Black Death raged, towns that were quick to implement quarantines and limit gatherings fared better than those that didn't. It's a testament to the accidental wisdom of trial and error. These were the early steps toward what we now recognize as public health measures. They didn't understand the science, but they were starting to grasp the concept of disease control, a small silver lining in a very dark cloud. So, as you lay down to rest, perhaps with a pouch of herbs by your bedside, just in case, you can ponder the strange tapestry of medieval medicine, a blend of superstition, astrology, and an occasional stroke of genius. It reflects humanity's desperate quest for survival in the face of an unseen enemy. And while today's medicine boasts vaccines and antibiotics, it's worth remembering that every scientific breakthrough stands on the shoulders of those who fumbled in the dark, searching for answers beneath the stars. Well, if medieval medicine was a curious blend of superstition and accidental insight, the religious and cultural reactions to the Black Death were a full-blown spectacle. Picture this: Europe in the grip of a pandemic, with fear as contagious as the plague itself. People didn't just want answers. They craved a narrative that made sense of the chaos. Cue the rise of the flagellants, those folks who decided that whipping themselves raw in public was the express ticket to divine favor. If you think this sounds like a Monty Python sketch, you're not far off. These flagellants would march from town to town, chanting hymns and lashing themselves in a fervor of repentance. Their logic: if the plague was a sign of God's wrath, maybe a little self-punishment would help balance the cosmic scales. It's the medieval equivalent of trying to appease a volcano with a fruit basket. And the crowds, oh, they loved it. It was the medieval version of reality TV, morbidly fascinating and impossible to look away from. While the flagellants were busy turning streets into impromptu theaters of penitence, another, darker story was unfolding. Enter the scapegoating of minority communities, most notably the Jews. In a time when rational explanations were in short supply, blaming an outsider was a convenient, albeit horrific, solution. Accusations flew faster than a knight's lance at a jousting tournament. Jews were accused of poisoning wells, baseless claim that conveniently overlooked the fact that they were dying of the plague too. It's a grim testament to how fear can override humanity's better instincts when the chips are down. This scapegoating wasn't just whispers in the tavern. It turned into violent pogroms that swept across Europe. From Strasbourg to Barcelona, thousands of Jews were massacred or expelled from their homes. It's estimated that by the time the dust settled, entire communities had been obliterated. If you're looking for humanity's darker side, this is it. A stark reminder that when fear takes the reins, reason often gets trampled in the stampede. But not everyone was lashing out or self-flagellating their way through the crisis. Some turned to art and literature as a means of coping. The Black Death inspired a creative outpouring that was as rich as it was macabre. Take Giovanni Boccaccio, an Italian writer who penned The Decameron, a collection of tales told by a group of young people holed up in a villa outside plague-infested Florence. It's like the original lockdown streaming service, offering stories of love, tragedy, and comedy to pass the time. In the face of mortality, people sought solace in stories, a tradition that remains alive and well today. Art, too, became a powerful outlet for expressing the anxieties of the age. The Dance of Death, a motif that depicted skeletons leading the living in a macabre waltz to the grave, emerged as a popular theme in paintings and sculptures. It was art imitating life in the grimmest way possible, yet it gave people a way to confront their fears head-on. The message was clear. Death is the great equalizer, and no one, not even the rich and powerful, could escape its reach. Churches, the epicenters of medieval life, also played a pivotal role in the cultural response to the plague. As the death toll rose, the clergy offered solace and salvation, albeit with a price tag. Indulgences, those little slips of paper promising a fast track through purgatory, became hot commodities. The plague was good business for the church, even if it didn't exactly endear them to the suffering masses. In some places, clergy's failure to stem the tide of death led to disillusionment and a questioning of ecclesiastical authority. Seeds of doubt were sown, seeds that would eventually sprout into the Reformation a couple of centuries later. Yet, despite the chaos and despair, the human spirit proved remarkably resilient. Communities adapted, even thrived, in the face of adversity. New social bonds were forged as people banded together to support one another. The plague, for all its horror, was a catalyst for change, forcing societies to rethink old structures and embrace new ways of living. In the towns and cities that survived, a curious transformation took place. The survivors, those lucky few who managed to dodge death's scythe, found themselves in a world of newfound opportunity. Labor was in short supply, and those able to work could command higher wages. It was a shift that began to erode the rigid class hierarchies that had defined medieval life. The peasants, once tethered to the land like serfs in a medieval soap opera, discovered the power of negotiation. A laborer could now pick and choose employment like a modern freelancer, though without the luxury of a LinkedIn profile. Even the architectural landscape began to change. In the wake of the plague, public health measures slowly trickled into urban planning. Streets were widened to improve air circulation, and sanitation became a matter of public concern. It was a slow march towards the modern city, but a march nonetheless. As you lay down to sleep, perhaps beneath a freshly painted image of the Dance of Death, you can't help but marvel at the strange alchemy of crisis and creativity. The Black Death, a harbinger of doom, also sparked a renaissance of human ingenuity and expression. Tomorrow, whether it brings more plague or a glimmer of hope, will be another chapter in this grand tapestry of survival and reinvention. And so you rest, knowing that while the spectre of the Black Death may loom large, the resilience of the human spirit stands ready to meet it head-on. In this medieval world, tomorrow is as unpredictable as ever, but it's a tomorrow you're determined to face, whip in hand or pen in fist, whatever it takes. As you close your eyes, the echoes of the past dance in your mind like a medieval minstrel, strumming tales of resilience and reinvention. The Black Death, that uninvited guest who overstayed its welcome, left Europe with more than just a population crisis. It reshaped the continent's cultural, economic, and social landscape. It's like the ultimate makeover show, but with fewer haircuts and more existential dread. Let's kick things off with art, because if there's one thing humans excel at, it's transforming horror into beauty. The plague's brush opened up new horizons in the art world. Forget the serene Madonnas of yore. Post-plague, artists got real. They embraced a stark realism that reflected the grim reality they lived through. This was no time for sugar-coated cherubs. Instead, artists painted life and death as they were, raw, unfiltered, and intensely human. Ever heard of the dance macabre? It's not a medieval dance party, but a vivid reminder that no matter how many coins you have in your pocket, death doesn't discriminate. It was a theme that resonated deeply, turning the macabre into a visual motif that swept through medieval Europe faster than the latest TikTok trend. And then there was the economy, or what was left of it. The Black Death didn't just hit the pause button, it hit reset. With an estimated 30-60% of Europe's population wiped out, labor became a precious commodity. Picture a medieval job market with fewer candidates than a niche dating app, and you'll get the idea. Landowners, once the aristocratic overlords of vast estates, found themselves scrambling for workers. Suddenly, peasants could command better wages, improved working conditions, and a fairer shake at life. The Statute of Laborers of 1351 tried to cap wages at pre-plague levels, but enforcing it was like herding cats. Peasants had their pick of the fields, and they knew it. The social order, consider it thoroughly shaken, not stirred. But let's not gloss over the harsh realities. The economic upheaval wasn't all sunshine and wage hikes. Inflation hit harder than a knight's lance, with prices soaring as goods became scarce. Grain, the medieval staple, shot up in price, leaving many to face hunger even as they earned more. And though mobility was on the rise, the social ladder remained a slippery climb. Sure, some peasants managed to ascend to the dizzying heights of the middle class, but for many, the climb was more of a shuffle. The old feudal barns didn't dissolve overnight, but they did start to fray around the edges. The church, that medieval juggernaut, also found itself at a crossroads. The Black Death had exposed cracks in its hallowed halls. Clergy who had promised divine protection were as vulnerable as anyone else, leading some to question the church's omnipotence. This skepticism sowed the seeds for future reforms, a precursor to the Reformation that would shake Christendom to its core. Yet, in the immediate aftermath, The church doubled down on its narratives of sin and redemption, because when in doubt, pass the indulgence plate. And what about the everyday folks? The survivors, those medieval MVPs, had to navigate a world forever altered. Communities were fractured, families decimated, but life, stubbornly, insisted on going on. People adapted because that's what humans do best. They rebuilt their lives on the ashes of the old, creating new social bonds and finding strength in solidarity. If you're looking for a silver lining, here it is. The resilience of the human spirit, as indomitable as ever. Fast forward to the modern era, and you'll see that we've learned a thing or two from our medieval ancestors. Pandemics are less about divine wrath these days, and more about science and public health. We've traded leeches for vaccines, and while our methods have evolved, the core of our response remains the same. Adapt, survive, and hopefully thrive. The COVID-19 pandemic, for example, echoed the past in its economic shocks and social upheavals. Yet, just like in the 14th century, it also sparked innovation, resilience, and a re-evaluation of the status quo. So, what's the takeaway from this medieval roller coaster? The Black Death was a catalyst for change, a harsh teacher whose lessons still resonate. It exposed the fragility of life and the tenacity of the human spirit, proving that even in the darkest times, there's room for growth. Whether it's through art, economic shifts, or social upheaval, humanity has an uncanny knack for turning crisis into opportunity. As you drift into sleep, let this be your lullaby, the story of a world rocked by an unseen enemy, yet emerging stronger, more aware, and ready to face the next challenge. The threads of history are woven with tales of survival, reinvention, and the enduring spirit of those who came before. So rest easy, knowing that you're part of a legacy that stretches back through the ages, a legacy of resilience, hope, and the unyielding pursuit of a better tomorrow.